Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to the rest of you guys. We are back, Bitcoin Magazine Live. I am in my mother's basement, and we are joined by lightning expert and the man, the myth, the legend himself, Guy Swann. How you doing today, Guy?
What is up? I'm doing pretty good. How about y'all?
Doing
Good,
great.
good.
Thank you for everyone who stuck around on the YouTube channel, waited for us to sort out our technical difficulties, but we are here. We are back. And just a quick reminder before we dive into all of this, guys, use code YTMAG, get 10% off your Bitcoin 22 tickets. We're all going to be here. Conversations like this and then some are going to be happening in Miami. Ticket prices go up on Friday. I don't know how else to convince you guys otherwise. Guy, are you excited for Miami in about 21 days?
Oh yeah, man. Hell yeah. It's gonna be absolutely bad shit.
What are you most excited for?
Uh Probably exceptional amounts of drinking and then without a doubt dancing to Don't You Know Pump It Up. I feel like that moment has to happen at some point. Um, but other than that, like I'm just stoked about like there's so many things that I know everybody's just I hate it. Like there's a part of me that's just like you assholes just release it. But like part of me also just loves that I know there are so many things in the pipeline that are being announced or officially released at Bitcoin 2022. Um, the impervious browser, like a bunch of these things will be dropping. And I know there's like three or four that I've heard rumors of and like some backroom conversations that I don't really know many details about, but I'm stoked. It's gonna be one after the other of just dropping something pretty epic, I'm sure. And I'm sure Jack Mallers and Bukele, have some psychotic crap in the bag, I'm sure.
Samson Mao. Yeah, there's like a competition among who can announce the most stuff
who's
at the
got
conference.
who's got the
Who's got
biggest,
surprises?
most insane announcement?
Yeah, yeah. What about for yourself? Any specific plans? Where will people find you at the conference?
I don't think the schedule is like concrete, like officially concrete yet. But I'm probably gonna be hanging out in maybe like the Swan. I was in the Swan Dome for like a third of the time last year, so I'll probably be hanging out with the Swan crew again a lot. So wherever they are, you'll probably find me. And I've got a panel on being sovereign in 2020s or in 2022 or something like that. And that's gonna be fun. That's gonna be fun. Got Parker Lewis, Breedlove. Uh, I think the other two are. We got a solid little panel on that one. That's gonna be a fun discussion. And I think I don't know. I don't know for sure on some other things. So I'll just leave it at that. There will
Yeah,
definitely be some other things that I'll be doing, and I'll be at the beefsteak. That sort of thing.
for sure. Very bullish on the beefsteak.
Always.
So you've been traveling quite a bit these last few weeks, it looks like. I was wondering if you wanted to talk about any of the talks you've been giving. I'm pretty sure you covered Lightning at a recent conference. I was wondering if you wanted to give us the cliff notes or even get into more depth about what you talked about there.
Yeah, yeah, sure. Uh, I did a Lightning Network workshop at BitBlock Boom last year, and it took 2 hours to get through. I was trying to really break down how how the contract works, because man, that's what it is. Like a Lightning channel or like a connection to Lightning is just a contract written in Bitcoin script, right? Um, and a lot of people just think you're putting your Bitcoin in a whole different place, and it's not secure or it's fractional reserve or all this really obnoxious stuff. Especially crypto loves to crypto loves to spread that nonsense. And But if you know how it works, it's like really simple. But there's nothing simple about how it works. It's not very intuitive from a design perspective. I remember when I read the white paper when it came out in 2015, and I think it was probably like my third time through it that like the arrangement finally clicked, and then I had a much better impression of, or a much better visualization of it when Aaron von Wertum on Bitcoin Magazine wrote his 3-part Understanding Lightning Network, because he actually had like little diagrams of the keys and the hashes and like all that stuff. So that was like really when it finally cemented, and I felt like I could actually explain it to somebody. Yeah, unconfiscatable. I had Tone hit me up and he was like, "You want to do the workshop again?" Because he was actually at the workshop, and I was like, "Yeah, that sounds great." And I thought I was gonna have like a little back room, because there were these side rooms where, like, quote unquote, we would do workshops, and then I just ended up on the stage, like opening, like before the conference got kicked off. I was just doing like a lightning tutorial. So I was like, "Oh, okay. Well, this is fun. We'll see. We'll see how easy it is to play around with lightning um, on the stage there." But yeah. So the gist of what I tried to cover was that Lightning. We all think of Lightning as like a payments network, and to some degree it is, but it's a payments network in the same way that its purpose is payments. Like the purpose of a car is to, move people from place to place, but that's not what a car is. A car is a internal combustion engine that turns, heat energy into mechanical energy. And in that same vein, Roy Scheinfeld has a really good article from Breeze Wallet. Has a really good article. Lightning is a liquidity network, and I really think this is this something that was kind of like sitting in the back of my mind, but he really kind of clarified it for me in that article, because I think this is the way to think about it. It is a network of establishing channels of liquidity for payments, which means that when things move on Lightning, when channels move, when channels adapt, it is to find out where liquidity is needed and where liquidity is no longer needed. And the purpose of that liquidity is to fulfill payments. But as a network on top of Bitcoin, it essentially extends all of the properties of Bitcoin. Is that if you ever have a problem with a channel, or you ever have a problem with a channel, like somebody you have a channel with, like some other node, like let's say they want to try to censor you or some whatever, or they just go offline, all you ever have to do is just go back and send a Bitcoin transaction, and all of your problems are gone, because you're relying on a censorship resistant, immutable, incorruptible Bitcoin to be the court for what's going on in Lightning. Everything that happens on Lightning is guaranteed by your ownership of it on Bitcoin. And the fact that everybody has fully signed transactions to redeem it. So you're basically you're putting Bitcoin in this multi-sig contract that you can just update regularly. And if anything ever goes wrong, you just exit back to a single sig. Like, so that is essentially the gist of it, except that your updates are off chain. You essentially just have a guaranteed set of arrangements about how you can exit that both you and your channel partner sign ahead of time, because you don't trust your channel partner. You don't necessarily even know who they are. So you sign this ahead of time so that you can get out if they're gone, and they know they can get out if you're gone, and then you can just keep updating. And as long as you continue to sign and agree to your exit plan, you can just keep updating indefinitely. 1,000 payments, 10,000 payments, 100,000 payments. You can route it through 30 nodes to get to its destination, or 2, or you could just pay your party directly. It's the routing layer for Bitcoin. That's the analogy that I think really is the most enlightening. Is like there was Ethernet was a broadcast layer for the internet. When the first internet popped up, it was actually a LAN. Like, it was a local area network design where you would just blast out your message to everybody on the network and then hope it reached its destination. They would just check, oh, this is not a message for me, and they would forward it along. Very much like Bitcoin. Bitcoin is a broadcast layer network. When I send out my transaction, I send it to every single node that exists. And all of them, or everyone that I'm connected to, they send it to every node they know until everybody has it. And then we all update, and we all have the exact same list of transactions. That's the blockchain. That's why it's a consensus mechanism. TCP/IP was created as a routing layer a layer on top with a set of instructions on how to get a connection or a packet of information directly to the recipient without bothering everybody else on the network. Because quickly, obviously, in no time at all, the network was so big that you just couldn't broadcast out. Like, it was absurd to, send one packet to 100 million different users so that they could all check and see if it was for them and then reject it. The analogy I used is, what if your cell phone had to receive every text message on the planet just to have 99.999999% of them rejected, just so you could get the one text message that was for you? Obviously, the internet would just have never worked. So we built a routing layer on top of it, TCP/IP. And because of that, now we have instructions on which nodes to go through. Like, if you ever seen a IP address or whatever, it's like 10. If you try to look at your internet one, your wide area network address is like 10.172.184.6 blah blah blah. Like, those are actually like regional server connections, like state server connections. It's very much like an address, like an actual address. You have like United States, New York, Buffalo, then this street. Like, it just gets more and more specific down at the end. Well, that's the exact same thing that an IP address does. 10 is your biggest zone, but it's based on servers. It's not geographic. So it's based on server relationships. But that's how you just get from, that's why, like, when you ping Google or you make a connection to Google or something, you might go through 9 servers to get there, but you only go through those 9 servers. You just go through the 9 that you need to your regional, to the state area, to the fiber that jumps across the country, to their regional node, to their ISP, and then to Cupertino or wherever. And nobody else is bothered. Nobody else gets your packet. Nobody else has to know that your packet exists. It is just through that route. That is what Lightning is for Bitcoin. You establish these Bitcoin contracts, these channels, with other nodes, with other addresses, with other people on the Lightning network, and then you can route payments through other multi-sig addresses. And you don't blast it to everybody. Everybody doesn't have a permanent record of all of your transactions. You just go through the hops that you need to get there. And the bandwidth relevant to each hop is your limitation to how much you can send, unless you split it up over multiple hops, you use multiple different nodes. It's funny that it actually has a lot of the same challenges that TCP/IP did, except it's with money. It's with digital money rather than digital packets. So there's a couple of new dynamics, but they're old problems. It's an old, like, it's a known architecture with known issues. So, like, that's why I think it's kind of obvious that, or at least to me, it feels obvious that this is the way this is going to work. That this is the way we're going to scale to the whole world. Because we've already done it once. It wasn't with money, but it was with communication. And then the number of different things that you can do on top of it, I don't know. It's crazy. There's a whole lot there, and it's moving at an incredible pace. I've been,
for sure.
Like I say, I use it every day.
Yeah, so I wonder, with that outlook, Bitcoin becomes something of a platform that can assimilate technology that it needs, that the community deems that it needs, or very much wants. What, in your mind, is the reason that Lightning succeeded? And I know you just explained this a little bit, where other sort of side chains and projects have failed. And I guess, like, my larger question is, like, what is the future outlook of Bitcoin to you? Do you believe that we will continue to bring in, maybe even technologies or protocols that we see in other cryptocurrencies, or is Lightning kind of one of the be all and end all?
I think, the funny thing about Lightning, and the reason why I think it probably caught a little bit better than the others, is that it's very, very, what's the word? Like modular in a sense. Like you build it from very, very small beginnings and then it creates this giant network. Whereas something like a sidechain is you have to have tons of people involved from the outset in order for it to be of any use. Whereas a lightning channel, if I'm paying somebody or just want to tinker with something, I can just open up a lightning channel to Fold and I can use it all day, and it could just be the only channel that exists, right? If
Mhm.
they just accept lightning and I just use lightning, I could still just be their one customer for as long as I wanted to keep that channel open. So because of that, I think it has this very natural build out phase. And we've seen it. We've already seen like two major phases of like significant growth in the network itself. There was like the 2018-19, just kind of like, oh, we're excited about it and we're just going to test it and see what happens. And uh, everybody was just a tinkerer, there wasn't really anything there. There weren't services. And then there's El Salvador phase of uh, a country adopting it basically, and Strike and Fold and Breeze and Phoenix and all of this stuff. Like we've had a huge growth phase in the last, give or take, about a year. Um, but I certainly think Lightning is also, though it's not like trapped on Bitcoin in any way. Lightning is literally just a protocol in its own right outside of Bitcoin. It's a way to design a relationship with multisig. So anything that has signatures and script can do this. Like you can do Lightning on Ethereum, you can do Lightning on, I don't know, some other whatever stupid nano. You could do Lightning on anything that has like basic scripting, and you can also do Lightning on layer 3 on Bitcoin. You can do Lightning on Liquid. You can do Lightning on state chains, like as a derivative to state chains. Like there's so many different things you can do with it, and it can also talk to any of those things. You can easily bridge the gap because you update the transactions of a lightning channel on Liquid or on a state chain or on Ethereum or on Bitcoin exactly the same way. It's all just done with a payment hash, or a PTLC, whatever, whichever little model you want to use there. So because of that, I don't think there's any real limitation to how big it can get in a sense, or to anything that it can do. Like for instance, like if Lightning has some sort of limitation on, like right now its biggest challenge is the liquidity in the right place. Well, you can actually fulfill liquidity in a different way. You can fulfill on the fly liquidity using the Liquid network or using state chains, so that you can still do it you can off chain solve the on chain liquidity problem of Lightning with a couple of different security models, or well, essentially with any security model that you have available to get liquidity with. So uh, that's why I don't think it's just so interoperable and easy to build in small pieces at a time. And that's kind of the way I felt like, I mean, that's kind of how the internet naturally emerged. I don't know. It just made intuitive sense to me for some reason. It just felt like it was obvious that this was the one that was really going to stick, because any sort of limitation it had is just helped by all of the other potential alternatives. And sure, there maybe something else even pops up in like a big way. Uh, ZK Snarks as or excuse me, ZK rollups as an idea sound good. They're novel cryptography in the sense that we really don't know much about their security. Bitcoin's really kind of more of a, oh, okay, if it's been around for 20 years and nobody's broken it yet, then we can use it. Well, the idea of a payment proof rather than a fraud proof is a better conceptual idea, but it's pretty fresh. We don't really know if it's smart to put it on in the foundation of something like Bitcoin when there is a potential risk. But then there's always the potential that like a shadow chain. Shadow chain is The model that Lightning Pool uses is that you can actually connect a Lightning contract, essentially like an agreement within a Lightning contract. So you have the security of Lightning um, connected to arbitrary computation. So what they do is they run a marketplace. So it's essentially a non-custodial marketplace. It's like an exchange, except that the exchange never custodies any funds whatsoever. You're just using them as a market maker. They find the buyer, you're the seller, whatever it is, and they connect you and settle out the price, and you can run the code alongside them. It's an open client, so to speak. And if you and the service provider don't get the exact same results from your computation, well, then you can just go your separate way. You can just be like, there's some sort of error here. I'm not participating in this. I don't want to lose my funds. But as long as everybody gets the same answer, well, then good to go. Exchange is done. I open up a Lightning channel. Well, that computation on the other side of that is completely agnostic. It's got nothing to do with Bitcoin. It could be a program written in Rust. It could be a Google spreadsheet, for crying out loud. It could be JSON. It just doesn't matter. So who knows what you can do with that? Like that's essentially Turing complete computation attached to a Bitcoin multi-sig payment. It just has there's no limitation there. So maybe we don't even need something like ZK rollups on Bitcoin to essentially get what that does, you know?
Yeah.
But anyway, that's a very, very long answer to, sure, there's going to be plenty of other things in addition, but I don't really think Lightning is going to go anywhere. I think Lightning is just going to be made better by a lot of those other things.
Yeah, I agree with you. So looking ahead, I mean, nothing's for sure. So I'm curious your thoughts. 100 years from now, the block subsidy is running out. Some people, I think, would even see that as a sort of a problem for Bitcoin's security. Do you see Lightning to be the solution for fees? Like, let's say fees get really high, and suddenly, I think the way that most people will interact with Bitcoin without even knowing it will be on something like Lightning, because they're not going to want to pay for final settlement final settlement might become something of a hot commodity, and but the block space is really kind of the real estate here that's going to go through the roof in value, I predict.
Yeah. So you're just asking, like, do I think Lightning is essentially the correct direction for the supposed fee problem?
Yeah, and I was just wondering your thoughts on that, kind of the future of Bitcoin. Like, is it a problem? Is it not a problem? Why not?
I'm okay with thinking about it as a problem, because I think that's how we should think about everything. Like the only reason we got as far as we have is because of adversarial thinking, and I worry that we lose that these days. Is let's assume it's going to break Bitcoin and think about it like that. But realistically, do I think it's a problem? No. I genuinely think we're kind of already moving in the direction that solves that issue. Like the issue of fees is, are we aggregating enough payments to make sense for higher fees on the base layer? That is exactly what Lightning does. That is exactly what Liquid does. That's what state chains do. In addition, I also think the singular ownership of a UTXO on Bitcoin will become more and more rare. It will become most ownerships will be shared, I think. That
Interesting.
Particularly with like Taproot and the tools that essentially hide multi-sig and arrangements, I think it would make a lot of sense. Like, and I say this because this is how I would love to do it with my friends and family who I help with Bitcoin doing stuff all the time, is that what if we had a single UTXO where we all had essentially the Lightning contract agreement to exit unilaterally if we needed to, and all our funds are in one place, but it's a single Taproot signature. Nobody really knows that it's multi-sig, because Taproot is indistinguishable no matter how much scripting or signature or whatever you have behind it. And only if for some reason there's contesting, there's some sort of a problem, does someone exit? But when everything's going great and everybody's in agreement and everybody's holding their own funds or opening up their own Lightning channels in this little, what are they called, like family trusts or whatever, like this was actually kind of the model for funds back in the 1800s before we got these huge centralized financial, this bloated financial mega giant things
Yeah.
that we think of today. It used to be families running funds together, like managing their own money. It used to be far, far more decentralized and centered around trusted groups of people. I kind of see it going back there because we have that base infrastructure that turns that incentive on its head and kind of makes the mega giant corporations no longer have the advantage. They no longer have the scaling advantage of finance or the permissioned advantage of finance because finance is no longer permissioned. So when that falls away, when that incentive and the feedback loop of massive financial corporations breaks, well, then I think we break back down into, 100,000 different little finance centers centered around families and local communities and stuff like that.
And do you think something like a micro strategy, or even yourself, like let's say, you become the Guy Swann bank, do you worry about banks kind of co-opting that ownership of the UTXOs, as you said, and having contracts, I don't know, with other stipulations in them for common people that aren't going to take the time to understand the value proposition that owning and custodying your own UTXO offers?
I think the maturity of this space will be, I think what we're learning right now in the world is that we should not trust people.
Yeah.
is that trust will be abused. And companies are not, a bank is not a safe place to put your money. People in the very comfortable Western world are learning that that's a stupid thing to do. People that I never would have thought of having that conversation with, I'm having that conversation with today. So we tend to learn the hard way. It's kind of humanity's way of doing things is we do what kind of works until it breaks, and then we cry about it, and then we fix it the way we should have fixed it from the beginning. And I think what we're watching right now is the breakdown of trust in our major institutions across the globe. And I think this will continue throughout the rest of the decade. Sure, they'll try to co-opt and get any semblance of power or control back. Sure, it'll take a really long time to transition away, and people will have to learn the lesson two times and three times, some. But no, at the other end of this, I don't think that's the future we're headed to. I don't see it. I think the trend is turned in the other direction. Yeah,
I'm curious what your
thoughts. Sorry.
No, all good, all good. I am curious what your thoughts are on a situation that none of us are gonna see come to fruition. But when the last Bitcoin is mined and there's no more block rewards, what effect do you think that has on the Lightning Network and fees to transact? Mind you, I'm sure there will be so many developments between now and 108 or 118 years from now. But let's just, in this hypothetical scenario, all other things are constant. The only thing that has now changed is the block reward is at 0. What effect do you think that has on the Lightning Network?
I don't think at that point it will change anything at all. I think in 4 halvings, 2 to 4 halvings, we'll already know everything that's going to happen in the fee market. Like we'll already be to a predominantly fee security structure on Bitcoin. 20 years at the absolute max, I think. So after the next 2 halvings, I think we'll really understand the trend and where we're going with it. But when Bitcoin becomes a highly relied upon global settlement system, I think we'll have more problems with fees too high on Lightning than we will with fees too low. I think, Andreas said it best 7 years ago. I don't even know. He said, the internet failed to scale constantly. Like that's what the internet did for its entire life, was that it figured out a new way to scale, and then it filled that shit up in like a week, and then we were on to the next disaster that we had to fix, and the next half solution, the next incremental step to make it keep working so that everybody's, email still went through. They could still watch a thing on Netflix. Like even while I was an internet technician, it was insane. I was only like a in the field sort of technician for like 3 years, 4 years maybe. But the difference in it was kind of like during the Netflix boom specifically. And the traffic, like I would just kind of like, I don't know, maybe I'm just a psychotic nerd, but I would like watch, like I would look up like my local node for like traffic statistics. And like, I was like really fascinated with like how the network was growing. And like, we were like every 2 months we had completely new equipment, and we're like replacing, node infrastructure. And we're like, okay, we're doing a trunk line improvement over here. So we're all going to have an update. You're going to get lots of phone calls, just so you know. And it's shocking how much goes on behind the scenes that users just don't even know. Like it just happens, and like we're trying to do it as quietly as we possibly can so that nobody's, their cable doesn't go out or their internet doesn't have to blink off for any span of time. But the traffic went like Netflix. Like I said, it was during the Netflix boom. Netflix went from like 5% of our traffic, like the traffic on our network, to like 80% in like 2 years. Like we went from like just not having like this steep data load to it was all the data. It was just nothing but streaming, and people were streaming for hours and hours and hours, and it was insane. And we were like, it was like this like kind of on the edge of panic for like a year and a half while we were trying to adjust to that. And that happened so quickly. And I don't think people realize how on the edge it's like, okay, we have to, when people were like, oh shit, why did this channel move or something? Like, why is channel 39 no longer on the base thing, and now I have to have a box for it? It's because the old broadband, the old like television analog communications take up like 100 times the space because it's so shitty. Like it takes like 100 times the space. Like think about it, like a analog channel is like, and this is actually not too far off. It's kind of the same wavelength. So like radio stations, you have like 107.9, 107.7, 107.5. Well, think of an analog channel as one channel is like from 100.1 to 103.1. But if you had digital, you could fit 101.1, 101.2, 101.3, 101, like you can just massive number of digital channels. So we would have to like completely rework like the back end of how all of these channels and things line up, and fight over which channel is going to be dropped from the analog stations to piss off the fewest number of people so that we can have 2 more upstreams and 8 more downstreams for everybody who's switching to Netflix. The internet has been that disaster since day one. It's just been a constant struggle of how do we scale. Bitcoin, I think, is going to go through the same thing. Lightning, I think, is going to go through the same thing. Is every time we've got something figured out and the fees drop back down or whatever, it's just going to unleash a huge ocean of new demand, of new people opening channels, of companies opening up channel factories with all of their business partners. And then we're going to go through another hype cycle of, huge explosive cycle like we've seen with El Salvador in the growth of the Lightning Network. And then suddenly Lightning Network payments are going to cost a crap ton. You're going to be paying $1 to move a freaking payment, $100 payment over Lightning. It's like 1%. This is insane. I am aghast. I am pissed. I'm going to call up Breeze for being just a unbelievably expensive LSP. I'm going to close my damn channel and I'm going to open it with async. We're going to argue about it and it's going to be a bitch and everybody's going to say it's dying and Lightning Network's never going to work, even though, 6 countries are now using it. And then we're going to go through it all over again. And it's just going to keep happening. But yeah, I don't think I outside of the fact that I love thinking about it adversarially, and I think we should plan for the fact that we need to know, or at least orient to the possibility that the lack of subsidy, because that's how Bitcoin has survived, to date, that the lack of subsidy will be a problem. But if I'm being honest, I don't really think it is, but I would rather assume it will be.
I'm kind of curious then, because you touch on it a little bit in that answer. And we talk about it in Bitcoin, how Bitcoin solves the issue for the unbanked. It helps people who don't have that banking access get that access. However, there are two things, quite frankly, that you need to access Bitcoin. You need internet, and maybe this is just me coming from a developed nation or country saying this, but you need a smartphone or some sort of way to access the internet. That's not the case for the entire world. So it feels like at a certain point, Bitcoin and the Lightning Network is going to reach that same block that Netflix reaches, where they want more customers in India, but not all of India is covered with internet access. Not everyone in India has a computer. How do we solve that issue? Because at a certain point, we have to also be answering and solving that issue on top of orange pilling everyone.
So I actually think that issue is being solved. Like we've never actually like the growth in the internet, like the number of internet users and the amount of internet access has been higher than it's ever been, like in the last 3 or 4 years. The cheap smartphone technology has also exploded. And it's funny, like Africa is such a great example. I really think Africa is a sleeping giant in all of this. Like it's just kind of ignored in all of Western politics and like macroeconomic analysis and all this stuff. And I think they're the amount of growth and the amount of people coming out of poverty on that continent is really kind of staggering. And the fact that they're leapfrogging all of the wired infrastructure and going straight to cell towers, and the incredible cost savings in doing that. And I was reading a story. It's years old now, but a story about as cell phones and smartphones become proliferated with $20 and $30 smartphones, essentially, like there's like that Mozilla, like dirt cheap Mozilla smartphone or whatever. But as those become essentially adopted in countries that are not used to having that infrastructure, and you can plop up a cell tower that gets you 100 miles worth of coverage, that there was like villages that don't even have like clean towns that don't even have clean water, and that have no idea who's got, like, did they travel 40 minutes every day to a market to sell fish or to pick up some supplies or something like that. And it's just kind of a shot in the dark. They're like, okay, I'm going to go east because I'm pretty sure I heard 2 weeks ago that they were probably going to have fish now. And then one cell phone with a connection lands in the town. And then everybody's just using that to update. They can call the nearest towns or whatever and be like, yeah, we didn't actually get the fish, but if you go 20 minutes to the west, they've got both fish and clean water. And suddenly the distribution of goods and services is orders of magnitude more efficient than it ever was. And you don't have whole days or even weeks wasted on people moving in the wrong direction because of one tiny little squeak of communication leaking through. And that explosion, the amount of economic benefit from that, the internet problem is being solved. That's the short answer. Obviously, we could do a lot more, and I hope Bitcoiners kind of put that as a focus, like Bitcoin business and like a lot of the investment and stuff, because that is, you're right. Without an internet connection, without a smartphone, you essentially don't have Bitcoin. But I think that's a local community problem right now, and when you're looking at the poorest countries, because I think them banding together and trying to get out from under their despotic governments, like I think that's the only reason poverty still exists in the world, is crappy governments that refuse to allow economic prosperity to actually occur. I think with time that problem is being solved. The deflation of technology, the incredibly constantly lowering cost of the chips and the connection to the internet, the Starlink, Blockstream satellite. I mean, think about it. Like even with Blockstream, if you have a satellite dish, you can actually use Lightning and Bitcoin without the internet. You can just connect directly to Bitcoin. Like they might get Bitcoin before they get the internet, So it's just, I mean, it's a challenge. It's not like it's fixed or anything, We've still got a decade, maybe 2 decades of like, yeah, we need to put a lot toward this. But I think a lot is happening right now. And that feedback loop is actually going to be really powerful as they become slightly more wealthy because they adopt a little bit of it. That's going to cause a feedback loop to give them exactly the wealth they need to reinvest and give them a better boost, give them better internet connection, give them more cell phones, et cetera, et cetera. And I think we're going to see that move quicker than any of the other infrastructure.
Yeah, those kinds of technologies they're mimetic. I mean, they move through society at such a rapid pace. I'm sure we've all experienced this personally with Bitcoin. Whether you were the first member of your family to get into it, you're probably not the only one now. If you've been in it for any length of time, you've probably managed to orange pill the homies and the mom and dad and everybody else. So it's fascinating to watch it play out.
Yeah, without a doubt. It's gonna be crazy. Was it Renee? Was it Renee Pickard? Shit, I don't know. Somebody on Lightning. But like talking about like even now, even with the technology as we have it today, talking strictly about Lightning scaling. If we take a very, very naive approach to onboarding the entire world and assumed full adoption of just the tools we have today, no other additional tools at our disposal, essentially we could get the whole world on board in like 4 or 5 years. That's assuming, maximum packed transactions together, now using Taproot for like a single signature for all the multi-sig. How many transactions can we squeeze into a block and assume everything that we do from here to then is Lightning channels, essentially? So that is a grossly simplified model, but it's pretty powerful to think that we're essentially that close to a theoretical global scaling, without, especially when we know half of the world is going to use custodians anyway, no matter what we do, maybe even more. But if we can onboard 100,000 businesses rather than 3, you've solved so much of the problem. And particularly if those businesses, even if they're quote unquote custodians, especially if those businesses are geographically like widely dispersed across all sorts of jurisdictions, because there's no borders, because there's no sanctions. Maybe I'm not 100% sure about using this bank in Russia or this bank in the US because they really just like to shut people's finances down and control what the company does. Well, maybe the one in Nigeria is perfectly fine and they've been great about it. Well, I'll just use a company in Nigeria, So the optionality of having no borders whatsoever, and just having hundreds of thousands of custodians competing, rather than two giant custodians with, an ocean of a regulatory moat around them, so that nobody can compete. Nobody can even get a license to open up a wallet for somebody. Like the huge leap forward in progress that alone makes possible. I think that changes the world even before we have everybody with their own UTXO, which is still a model I hope to get to one day.
Yeah, I wonder, not to be like the fudster on the podcast, and to clarify, I don't think this has any bearing on the Bitcoin protocol itself, but there is a lot of talk or worry I think Shinobi, for an example, is a pretty big champion of this skepticism about companies coming in and basically, from what I understand, implementing maybe not the most private or safe kind of protocols when it comes to Lightning and having a node. And much of the Lightning nodes we've seen come online in the last year come from Umbrel, for example, or other big companies. Do you have any concerns when it comes to that, or what are the problems you foresee there?
Well, in the, I guess to some degree, Lightning is still reckless, like Lightning is not perfect. It still has its hiccups. Like I still have, every once in a while, one payment won't go through on one wallet or whatever, whether it's, oh, I don't have the liquidity or something, and I'll just jump over to a different one and then do it over there. But I have so many wallets now that it always works for me if I just use the next one. But without a doubt, Lightning is a step function improvement on privacy over Bitcoin, but it still has plenty of privacy concerns. And I think we're going to see kind of continuations of things like that. It's kind of like that's what we saw with Bitcoin. Is Bitcoin could be way more private, but we're all using on and off ramps, and largely that's kind of a problem of a transitional issue. Like when you have a Bitcoin circular economy, Chainalysis is a far more difficult problem because you don't just have these huge exchanges like Binance to just aggregate identity and ownership of a single address or a whole group of wallet addresses for millions of users in a single place if those users are actually transacting with each other over something like Lightning. And they're not only using Bitcoin to go back and forth between dollars for like 80% of what they do, which is really kind of where we are. So that's actually a huge privacy vulnerability that is purely a transitional issue. Once you have a circular economy, that type of vulnerability is not as prevalent, I guess you could say. Lightning is a step function improvement, still has problems. Everybody's nodes are public. You're broadcasting. You specifically broadcast to the public network of Lightning so that people know you were there and which channels you have. And if you connect your identity to that pub key, well, then people can see your channels and your UTXOs just like they could on Bitcoin. Like that doesn't really change. What's different is your individual payments, not necessarily which UTXO you have, but which payments you make over the Lightning network. And there are plenty of privacy tools on top of that, but I think this is humanity. I mean, this is why I follow Shinobi, and I really like, him, John Carvalho, and there's like 3 or 4 others that just can't think of off the top of my head, but that I think of as like contrarians that I follow specifically because I know they're just, every time this new thing comes out, they're going to shit on it on Twitter. And I appreciate that. Like I want to get the other side of it. So I feel like I have some semblance of reality of what I'm looking at. But I also think generally they are contrarian for the sake of being contrarian. Like there's always something negative to point out. There's always a limitation. Like that is never going to change. So it's important to point out those trade-offs. But if we only focus on the trade-offs rather than the fact that it is an improvement over the last thing, well, then we're only ever going to see what didn't come to fruition yet, right? Yeah. And I think that's kind of where we are with Lightning. Is yeah. I mean, Jesus, look at the internet. Look at the history of everything. There was always a optimal way to implement it, and everybody always just did the shortest route they could to just say, "I have it." Like we always implemented it poorly. We always implemented it without the best cryptography or without the best privacy. And I think it's up to us to keep making incremental improvements to all of those things. And the users adopt them, which essentially forces the companies and the merchants and the exchanges and whatnot to adopt them. And that's how we push forward. I mean, yeah, right now there's a lot of really loose implementations. Security is iffy in some situations. Privacy is a bit of a mess. but it's all better than it was 2 years ago. So
Yeah.
I see a good trend at least.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of amazing things still in the works.
Yeah, I think there's no argument as to whether, Lightning is good or not. Like you said, it's just there are no advantages, only trade-offs. It's just a recognition of like, hey, we're here now. How do we improve this iterative process? And I think with the help of people that are very, loudly contrarian to new things that Bitcoin wants to bring home to roost. I mean, I think that's how we get to the cleanest version of the simulation that we can.
For sure, for sure. Yeah. And that's why I'm actually doing I think it'll be next week. I'm doing adversarial week on Bitcoin Audible. I've had a little collection of no, Bitcoin shouldn't be ossified. Lightning Network privacy sucks. Like 4 or 5 articles that I've got that I want to hit on the show and kind of talk about it specifically that, in honor of Brian Trolls.
Awesome.
And but yeah, I love like adversarial thinking is how we make progress. Hopium never really did anything for anybody.
Guy, I'm kind of curious. We haven't really touched on this specific comparison yet. But Lightning, in my eyes, is a direct competitor to Visa, MasterCard, and just credit card payments. How do we get to a point where, like, I'm of the notion Visa and MasterCard do look at Lightning as a legitimate competitor and a way to essentially I can't think of a word other than deplatform right now, but essentially get rid of
defund, disrupt. Yeah.
Thank you. Essentially, how do we get to that world? Whether it's convincing all of the merchants how to have their own node, educating them on that, educating them on setting up a Lightning channel for themselves, or is it let's just continue to ramp this up and get to a point where everyone just has enough Bitcoin that they need to start transacting it anyways?
Competitive advantage. Blockbuster went to streaming because Netflix, not because everybody demanded streaming from Blockbuster. Like we will replace them, or they will move to it, or they will die, because the model does not make sense anymore. I mean, I think Jack Mallers said it best. They're already dead. They're already dinosaurs. They just don't know it yet, and enough of the customers don't know it yet that it just hasn't happened. But the asteroid is already headed here. And if they do not change to it, there is simply no model that can compete with it if someone implements it properly. Because you're not just fighting Western Union or just fighting Visa. The model of the Lightning Network is irrespective of whether it's remittances, whether it's merchant payments, whether it's subscription payments. It doesn't matter. The payments are exactly the same no matter where you are in the world or what you're doing. It's just Bitcoin. It's just Lightning. And because of that, I mean, he said in was the Peter McCormick episode, I think, his interview, he was talking about like the regulatory issues, like the overhead of dealing with them is why they have completely separate industries. Like remittances is one industry and merchant payments is another industry, and they don't cross over because the cost of doing either is so expensive that they can't do both. And now there is a model using the Lightning Network and just offloading fiat on either side is so unbelievably dirt cheap and so much better that it doesn't care if it's a remittance or a merchant payment. It's one and the same. And because of that, they're just dead. They're just dead if they don't do something. And all we have to do is just keep building. We can completely ignore them, and they'll either be here or we'll just get to laugh one day when Visa says, they're declaring bankruptcy and they're having to close down like Kmart. They're like, we're going to shut down a whole bunch of our institutions or whatever because everybody's just using something that's cheaper, faster, and better and has no restrictions.
I look forward to the day when I don't have to pay a 5% fee just to access or pay for something just because I wanted to use a credit card.
Really crazy that we put it that somehow we have come to this point in the age of ubiquitous communication, where we can stream video to each other live from 6 different locations and project it out to 1,000 people all at the exact same time on multiple platforms, but we can't do a credit card payment. But I can't send anybody here money unless we're using Bitcoin. It's so stupid. It's so weird.
The irony of what really set me off on this was I was trying to buy a pupusa, an El Salvadorian, delicious breaded meat at my local farmer's market. And they had Square, and they had a set 75 cents charge on a $5 charge. So it was like a 15% fee. I was like, the irony of this is El Salvadorian food, and I'm using Jack Dorsey's company's like software or hardware, if you will. Like, come on, guys, let's fix this, figure this out.
Yeah. And I still can't, like, even like at a gas station or something. I know it's funny when they let me pay for something that's like 50 cents or like $1. It's funny. I'm like, why do you let me? Because I know you just lost money. Like you just paid 20 cents to give me this thing, you know? And it's funny, but like I still run into that all the time. Like, you know, if I'm just making like a short, I mean, you know, luckily inflation has helped them. Everything is $6 now. Bubble gum is $4. But it's insane that we still put up with that. It seems crazy to me that we haven't solved that problem.
What is
literally until Bitcoin?
Have you ever to a complete stranger merchant gone down this rabbit hole with them, and what has that conversation been like? Did it come to fruition? Was it just like, oh, this is another crazy person telling me about internet money again? Like, go away.
Oh, that's a good question. I usually have this conversation with the Bitcoin curious already, you know, at like a meetup or like in a bar conversation or whatnot. But without a doubt, everybody complains about it. Like every merchant knows the struggle of having to deal with merchant fees, especially if they're smaller, because they can't cut a deal. They can't bargain, they can't negotiate with Visa about their credit card charges. Whereas if you're Apple, you can, you know, because Apple could set up their own freaking infrastructure, right? So they get a deal. They'll get, you know, 0.5% and, you know, 22 cents per transaction or something like that. But, you know, the gas station or the local, you know, people using Square or whatever, you know, my pet groomers or whatever, they just get what they get, you know, 2%, 50 cents per transaction. They don't have an alternative. What are you going to use? Don't accept Visa credit card. Don't accept Visa cards. Ha, good luck. So that struggle is real. Now they'll always, like, typically if they don't really know about Bitcoin or they're not curious in Bitcoin, they just like, oh, you're going to sell me this scam, like, to you know, to tell me I got merchant problems or whatever. I don't need volatility problems on top of merchant problems. And but that's where the beauty of something like Strike and, you know, Cash App now integrating Lightning and what I think the world that I think we're headed towards at a pretty incredible pace right now is that Lightning is integrated into everything, but they can accept dollars, because that's essentially still what they want. I don't think that will last much longer, but right now that is still the world we live in. In that sense, Lightning and Bitcoin is still one of the best solutions. I think we're getting closer and closer there. It's just a slow realization process, slow maturity process, and a very slow and painful breakdown in trust. In so much of what we thought was just always going to work is just not working anymore.
I'm curious, and you have shared stories throughout your own shows, throughout other shows as well. But I'll ask it in a different way. What were, when you first learned about Bitcoin, some of the initial concerns that you had that you then got over?
With Bitcoin specifically?
Yes.
You know, when I first got into Bitcoin, it was just crazy, you know, libertarian anarchist utopia. Like before I really understood anything about it, I was certain it was going to replace it was just the thing that was going to fix the whole freaking world. Then I lost an ungodly amount of, well, at the time, an absurd amount of money. Basically, I thought I lost everything that I put into it. Because I waited until the peakity peak and then bought a lot and then watched it go to the bottomy bottom and threw up. So at that point, I was realizing that I really had no idea what I was doing. Like if somebody asked me to explain how Bitcoin worked, I was like, I don't know. It's libertarian utopian money, you know. like it was just BitTorrent, cypherpunk, Austrian economics to me, and I genuinely did not know how it worked. Then that's when, assuming that I had lost everything that I had put into it, that's when I kind of put my nose to the grind, or whatever you want to say, and just decided I was going to read everything I could get my hands on and figure out how it worked and understand it, to see if I was an idiot and I just bought into a moronic internet token scam, or if I had really stumbled upon what I thought I had stumbled upon. And luckily, after lots and lots and lots of reading, I was even more convicted than I was when I knew nothing about it. But using it early on was still a nightmare. I mean, as someone who has lost, keys with more coins on them when they were worth nothing, but more coins than I have now by a good margin. I know what it's like when all of the stuff is highly technical. You can only use it via command line, and you can screw up super, super easy. So those are always problems, but those seem like the most real problems to me. And I guess it's just because I was a user, quote unquote. But it was constant, iterations and improvements to those things. Seed phrases. Seed phrases were an innovation. People think seed phrases that would just restore your entire wallet is just how Bitcoin works. Nah, not at the beginning. It did not work that way. You could, if you did not save every address that you created and update your backups every single time you received a new transaction, you would lose those transactions and those private keys. They were per address. There was no seed. There was no master recovery process. So, there were plenty of headaches. It was frustrating to use. And that was probably the biggest hurdle. It just seemed like the average person is not going to use this crap. We got a lot of work to do, but it was exciting too, because you got to see those things develop. You got to see it from the absolute bare bones that it was turn into this thing that now have fucking 20 lightning apps. It's kind of crazy. The gap between, there and here is really kind of astonishing when you're looking at it from a user experience sort of perspective. It really is. It's just an app that you can download on your phone and receive payments, and it works. It's kind of crazy. It's really crazy.
I have to selfishly ask, as I do try to host a Bitcoin book club on this show from time to time, what would be a book or two that you would highly recommend, knowing full well we may or may not have already covered the book, which will just validate what I'm doing over here?
I would love to sit down with a Bitcoin book plug, but did that with John Vallis a couple times.
Dallas was a guest on yesterday's show, so if anyone who did not catch that, go back and check it out. We had a long philosophical discussion about Bitcoin and religion.
Ooh, that's a good one. Bitcoin and religion is always epic, I feel like. Let's see. Let's do something I've read recently rather than one of the obvious ones, like Sovereign Individual or something like that. Let's see, what did Does it have to be a Bitcoin book?
No.
We did do sovereign individual to like
Yeah.
let you know.
Yeah, for sure.
So,
Obviously. Yeah.
I am definitely pushing to include books like one of my all-time favorites, The 23 Things They Do Not Tell You About Capitalism, written by an econ professor out of I believe it's Cambridge. Highly recommend that book. I've been trying to email that professor for some time to get onto the show. And then we have been. I definitely recommend.
I'll go Super Intelligence by Nick Bostrom. Oh, what do you got? You hold one up right there.
So
Economic
this one
laws.
is The Economic Laws of Scientific Research, and it's about how politics has ruined science.
Okay.
And but it's not quite so deliberate as that or explicit as that. I feel like, or at least so far. But I was really interested in this one. This one was actually quoted by Seyfedin in the Fiat Standard. And then there's also The Problem with Political Authority. Neither one of those have audiobooks. I might actually reach out to them. The Problem with Political Authority is fascinating. Just like I'd say it's probably a little bit dry, but it's really, really solid content. If you did a really good audiobook for it, I feel like it could get a lot of listeners. And then there's another one I've actually got, and I can't even remember the freaking name of it, but it is a beast, but I'm slowly going through it, and it is fascinating. Actually, I'm going to go get it real quick. Because otherwise I'm going to forget.
Got that.
Do that. But in the meantime, for those who have not already, use code YTMAG, get 10% off your Bitcoin 22 tickets. Guy is going to be there. Alex is going to be there. Chris is going to be there. I'm even going to be there. I'm going to leave my mom's basement and show up to Miami. So get your tickets now before they go up in price. They'll be shooting up. And you know what? If you can't take off work during the week, firstly, get a Bitcoin job, not a fiat job. And
secondly, just say you have COVID. They asked for it.
Or
tyrants.
Tertiarily, feel free to just buy a Sound Money Fest ticket and come party with us on Saturday at Sound Money Fest. Code YTMAG still works for that. And it's just going to be a blast. We're going to be partying with Deadmau5, Logic, Steve Aoki. Guy, I don't know if you're a music festival type, but are you excited for any of the artists at Sound Money Fest?
I actually don't know who's going to be there, but yes, I'm just excited about the idea that there's a music festival. If you give me a couple of drinks in, I will just listen to music.
I will be feeding you alcohol, Guy. I promise you that. But also, as a big comedy nerd myself, the likes of Hannibal Buress and Tim Dillon will also be performing at Sound Money Fest. Tim Dillon will be recording another episode of his podcast.
That is cool.
Hannibal Buress is going to do a set, and I believe actually Jay Farrow, another SNL legend, is going to be there. So
we've got some more super secret comedian lined up. I'm excited.
It's going to be like Sound Money Fest alone is going to be just a banger. And that's on the tail end of the most epic Bitcoin festival in the world. But now
Bitcoin being mainstream is weird.
what was that?
Really weird. I'm not used to this. It's really bizarre that it's like kind of like a cultural force. Really?
Have you now gotten to a point where like you go grocery shopping and someone's like, "Oh my God, that's Guy Swann"?
No.
So it's not mainstream enough.
I will say that I'm not mainstream famous. I'm nerd famous, right? Like I've got like Bitcoiners just know me because I read to them. I read them bedtime stories. But I did actually have someone recognize me in one of my favorite coffee shops. He didn't go to the meetups or anything. He didn't know about like the meetup in our area. I can't remember his name. God, that sucks. I hadn't seen him at the meetup in a while. He came like the next week or whatever after I told him about it. But it was so weird. I was not expecting it. He like kind of like he did like a double take from like the table. And I was like, is this guy hitting on me?
I feel like you're going to get stopped in the airport before you even get to the conference, 100%.
I will bump into people that I know in the airport before the conference. I did that actually when we were leaving Miami last year. I bumped into like two people just at the airport. They were just like, "Oh, what's up?" And I just knew them. I'd had conversations with them. Bitcoiners are prevalent. Like when this conference happens, and it's going to be even more insane this year. It's just like Bitcoiners are everywhere. It's like being on Bitcoin Twitter. But here is
the code breakers.
The comprehensive history of secret communication from ancient times to the internet. And this thing,
damn, that's a tome.
But it is actually an interesting read. It's told in a series of like historical stories and stuff. It's not like super dry like you might think. I'm very, very slowly getting through it because I've got plenty of things to read. But this one I'm particularly excited about. I don't get many opportunities to sit down and read it, but I hope to go through this whole thing. And Jesus, I don't even know if I'll ever make a 110-hour audiobook of it, but maybe one day. We'll see.
That's awesome.
I have to say, Guy, you have now very quickly shot up as one of my favorite guests, because anyone who recommends books for me immediately becomes one of my favorite people. So thank you for those recommendations.
Yeah. I got a book or two. I read one of those.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to give Chris a chance to hop in and ask any questions. Chris, do you have anything
Chris
on your mind? You're just producing
over there. Like,
yeah. I mean, I get the privilege. I live in the same area as Guy, so I get to talk to him at meetups, unlike you and Q. I was just running the stream.
Were you there last night? Actually,
I was.
I meant to. Oh, damn! I'm sorry, I missed you. I was meaning to actually get back out to it, but yesterday, like about mid-morning, midday, they're doing like a footing for there's like a jut out that I'm trying to do for the basement to have an entryway from outside. And it was not in the right spot, and it was not the right shape, and I was like, oh shit. And I went down and talked to him, and I ended up having to spend all afternoon yesterday. I didn't even get an episode out. I spent all day last night until like 1 o'clock in the morning drawing up plans for the basement so that we can have this in exactly the right spot. So that's why I missed it. I was sad. It was like 9 o'clock, and I was like, shit. I didn't even think about it. I totally missed the meetup. But anyway.
No worries. We got BitDevs next week. We got the meetup next Tuesday as well. So we got good stuff on the horizon.
But when is the BitDevs?
Monday.
Monday? Same spot?
No, talk to Steve. He'll reach out to you about
it.
Yeah, Alex Q, I don't know if there's anything else you want to add.
I just want to re-emphasize, use code YTMAG to get those 10% off. We will have a really fun stream. I know some of you guys in the chat have shared with us you're unable to make it either due to just the bullshit vaccine requirements or, unfortunately the cost of these tickets is not exactly cheap. Highly recommend that if you want a job in Bitcoin, like this is the place to be. Place to meet people, shake hands, and put a face to the name before you just blindly send out emails and a resume. Guy, I want to pass it off to you before we cut to a commercial though, and just sort of anything that you'd like our audience to check out, anything that you've been working on. One of the busiest men in Bitcoin. I'm sure you have countless things that you'd love to plug, and give you that opportunity to do it now.
Hell yeah. Probably just I'll just plug Bitcoin Audible. That's really my main focus, and it's where I drop everything that I'm working on and try to talk about it. I got some memes on the way. I always love my high class meme craft over here. You gotta, like the good memes deserve real work. They deserve that proof of work, and that's what I try to bring to the meme space. I don't work in volume. I work in quality. Yeah, hopefully, working on some more video projects soon. Always more audiobooks. Like I think I got just 3 audiobooks just dropped in my lap. I'm really excited about them actually. Yeah, follow me at the Guy Swann on Twitter. And you can check out guyswann.com too. If you want to send me like an email or something. I was getting so much spam on my posted email address that I've actually put it behind a BTC Pay thing, so you have to pay 50 sats or whatever. But
fair.
At least the emails from the website have stopped. God is unbelievable. If you just leave an open email address somewhere, Jesus Christ, it's like flies to shit. And maybe I'll lower it to like 10. Maybe I should make a lightning login. Just as long as you have a lightning wallet, right? Like you just that should be enough
You're
to
good.
stop all the bots, right? And bitcoinaudible.com, I'm slowly getting that back up to date. And trying to do post and get my vote page back up. So if you want to listen to something specific, you can vote it up, give it 10 sats, and it bumps up to the top of the page. Yeah, Bitcoin Audible and the Guy Swann.
Awesome. You guys heard it. Make sure to check it out. If you guys aren't already following Guy, what are you doing?
Yeah, we'll make sure to post it in the chats, on the YouTube side, on the Twitch side as well. Thanks for joining us, guys. Thanks for joining us, Guy. This has been awesome. I've been looking forward to this for weeks, man. Love your show. Yeah. Love your podcast. Everybody go check that out for sure.
Appreciate it, man. Good time.
We'll cut to a quick commercial, and then we'll bring in Nolan, who has been sitting patiently to bring you guys the next episode of The Breakup. So stick around, and we'll be right back.
You see the whole face like
we're back.
We are back. What is up, everyone? I mean, Nolan just sharing with us how proud of a father he is. But in the meantime, we got to ask, as always, even though I know the answer to the question, how you doing, Nolan?
I love life. And there are really good reasons for it today, especially. I'm going to do something a little challenging, I think. I'm going to do a full-throated argument for UBI on the Bitcoin standard. And we'll see if I get there. Some of it's still a bit of an experiment as far as I can tell, but I don't think we have a choice. First of all, I'll tell you why. You turn on the news today and, you go on, let's say, Fox, right? You see Kamala Harris. Everyone's saying she doesn't know that NATO and Ukraine aren't the same thing. She misspoke on stage. What an idiot. People out there actually trying to tell you that she doesn't know what she's talking about. Now, I'm not the biggest Kamala Harris fan at all, and I have a lot of doubts about her competency. But if you're sitting there listening to a story where she doesn't know that NATO and Ukraine, and that was the whole point of the war in the first place. If you think that, then you're getting, people are doing fake news on you. And you're listening to it, right? You're a victim of fake news then. If you're getting angry, oh, this Kamala Harris doesn't know anything about stuff. Not here to argue she's great at her job. Just trying to tell you that if you're angry about Kamala Harris not knowing the difference between NATO and what's going on with Ukraine and all that stuff, then someone is using a form of psyop on you. Likewise, I saw today the football player Herschel Walker, and this would be the other side of it. Herschel Walker last night said, I don't believe in evolution. And every single one of these make a couple bucks journalists went to a degree, the ones with the profile pics looking off into the distance, or maybe they're in some media shot about the time they're arguing about something on the one time they were invited on CNN or something like that, dunking on him. Everyone's dunking on him. What an idiot Herschel Walker is. He's so stupid. Oh God, evolution, what a moron. Right? But the truth is, anyone who listens to simulation theory, for example, can actually cast a credible doubt on the theory of evolution. Now, I agree that science in its totality still declares it a theory. Not necessarily true, but within all the parameters and rules of science, it looks like it's still a sort of consensus. But if you just go back 20 or 30 years ago, at that time, you couldn't even question it a little bit. But now if you come and say simulation theory, you're dealing with an entirely different concept that looks like it has a lot of validity. So if you want to come out and say that there are alternative ideas to evolution theory, you can actually say that nowadays. You can have an intelligent conversation about that. And it certainly isn't a bunch of journalists dunking on you. Oh, you're so stupid. He's running for the Senate, for God's sakes. Not that senators are smart, but this is a competent man. He played in the NFL. He did all kinds of stuff that would amaze people. Herschel Walker, I think he even went to the Olympics for the bobsled. And then you even take a look at his son, right? If you talk about journalists and media, his son is probably, I think, destined to be one of the most persuasive people on the planet. He's as handsome a person as you'll ever find, and really coherent and makes tremendous arguments. And the quality of the son, I think, in some ways can tell you a bit about the father in this case. So I don't know Herschel Walker personally, but I've listened to him speak. He certainly doesn't sound like an idiot. And I'm not saying he even has a healthy take on evolution versus creationism versus a sophisticated look at simulation theory or anything else. That's not what I'm arguing. I don't know the answer to any of this stuff. You know what's really a bad look? Journalists like the ones dunking on Herschel Walker talking about science, the same way they talked about COVID, the same way they talk about the war, the same way they talk about Kamala Harris not knowing that Ukraine is in NATO because she made a mistake on stage at one point. Now, she might be on drugs, she might be drinking too much, she might make mistakes when she speaks. I don't know any of those things, just like I don't know the truth about simulation theory. Of course I don't know the truth about simulation theory, but if you go on Scientific American, if you go on Wired, if you go on any of these science philosophy type magazines, you're going to see an argument that's pretty coherent and that says evolution is dumb and it doesn't make any sense, especially in light of simulation theory, which is gathering more and more adherents or people that think it fits with their worldview. Christians, Muslims, a lot of people can use simulation theory, and it sort of can harmonize and dovetail with their own worldview. Evolution, not always. Now, once again, not arguing about what's right or wrong. I don't know any of it. I certainly see the force of evolution in nature, and there's tremendous amount of evidence that something like evolution happens and that things evolve, right? No one's arguing that. What we're just talking about is the big picture. Where does it come from? And some people say simulation theory. And if that's true, then a lot of the other stuff isn't. So if Herschel Walker wants to say that, fine. Now, I bring up all of this, the journalists, because in the end, when you look at what these people are doing, you got to admit something, that they're not exactly going to learn how to code after all this. A lot of what's gone on has made them maybe not capable of participating in the modern economy in the future, and maybe not even employable. Maybe they can't even have a job. I mean, if someone spent all these years laughing at other people online, writing for a publication, not making a lot of money, and basically just not making any friends or generating any goodwill in the world, what are they going to do? I mean, really, what are they going to do? You look at Canada's media right now. Canada's media is 100% subsidized by the government. It would not exist. The official, mainstream media, the television stations and the newspapers, all of them are subsidized. So eventually these media, without boomers around, without their demographic that's still consuming that stuff, the subsidies are just going to continue. They're not exactly getting Herschel Walker's son, Christian Walker, to come read their stuff. He's on Instagram and on Twitter and having a great career, and people are following him there. But no one is going to these mainstream media channels. So we all know there's a problem. And in Canada, for example, with all of the ill will that was created with the trucker thing and the media, where would they go if there was no more subsidy? It's not like anyone would just hire them. It's almost the opposite of people being prejudiced against, truckers at one point saying you're not going to get hired if you gave money to the convoy, but the other might become true one day. You worked for the Canadian state broadcaster. Well, no, maybe you might want to look somewhere else to make French fries. And it's a big problem. But the good news is we can take inspiration from China. China has an incredible idea, and I think it might actually help Bitcoin in the future. And the idea is this. So China operates on these 5-year plans for their economy, essentially planned economy. And for the 5 years can definitely spill over if the plan lasts longer. From the time they joined the WTO in 2001 until 2019, 2020, it was all export led. The whole point of the economy was to get US dollars for selling goods abroad, and then internally stabilizing the domestic consumption economy through pegging of the currency and making sure that all consumable items have a non-inflationary price and that aren't reflected with all the wealth creation that was going on in the country. Basically cut off foreign flows of capital into the country, distribute it in a way that they thought was good, and then make sure there's enough left over for consumption to be relatively stabilized. So that's why they copied the Japanese and South Korean early battle plan of building really large ships, because you can sell those for a lot at once and get a lot of US dollars in once. And this was the plan for a long time. But just a few years ago, they came up with a pivot from just export led. And what they call it is the dual circulation economic strategy. So it's the dual circulation economic strategy. And once again, it admits that the way they use their currency abroad and domestically is two totally different things. That domestic consumption and the Chinese money abroad are unrelated in some ways, and that they would create relations between them that would help achieve different policy objectives. And the strategy basically is doubling down on domestic consumption. So versus the pivot from the old export led to the new one is domestic consumption, homegrown technology, international trade and investment, but certainly driving up the reserve currency status of the yuan. And here's a Twitter thread from a handle called Cultural Husbandry. And they talk about what this plan looks like and what it would take for the Chinese yuan to become the global reserve currency and sort of where it's at right now. So here's what they're up to make this part. So here are the two parts. That's the internal part. We see consumers, goods, services, international part of the Chinese currency, that's savings, increased collateralization of it, increased use of it, and increased use of it for funding mechanisms for all kinds of things. So the first part of this plan mentions that how hard China is trying to work to elevate the status of the renminbi in the world, the yuan, and what's going on with it. So right now, of course, they can't. We've mentioned on the show a few times, they can't just oppose or challenge the US dollar so easily. But here's where the movement is, if you want to see where some of the thresholds are, because that's what was really cool about what this person did. So first of all, you've got Saudi Arabia considering yuan denominated market for oil. We've talked about it on the show, but something I didn't know before that we've never talked about before is that they're talking about a yuan futures market. They're talking about a petro yuan. So a way for a vast amount of price discovery to have on yuan. When this happened for Bitcoin in 2017, it was one of the big reasons for which there was a ton of enthusiasm and growth. And a lot of the growth in Bitcoin over the past 5 years probably wouldn't have happened if there wasn't the ability to short Bitcoin, bet against it, at a large scale in this way. So because that new institution sort of existed, it allowed the currency to get a lot more confidence, and it allowed Bitcoin to grow. So what they're looking for now is that apparently about 25% of the entire oil production of Saudi Arabia goes to China. And it looks like they want that to be sold for yuan, and they want the futures market to come in to bring institutional investors and everyone who can bet against it, which theoretically can help build confidence, because you can now do those kinds of things. Central banks, this is one of the big thresholds that she came to. So we've got this petro yuan and futures. The next big threshold that was mentioned that would change the world as far as how the Chinese yuan is viewed is the amount held by other countries. So it's already a reserve currency, but it's not a global reserve currency. And the difference is really just a matter of amounts. And what she says is $700 billion worth of yuan held by central banks around the world would bring it to that status. Right now, they're at about 290. So that would take more than a doubling to get to the 700. But it's predicted that it will happen, especially with oil now creating this huge market. You've also got Venezuela that is openly selling oil for yuan. So that's a big part of how this will grow. The way it all breaks down, I don't know if these numbers can come through on it. My font might have been a bit low, but we've got is the current supplies of global reserve. US is almost 60, 59.5. The euro is 20.5. The yen in Japan is 5.9, almost 6. And the yuan is 2.2. So the Chinese currency is 2.2. What this number would indicate, this doubling, it would have it pass the Japanese yen, which is what one of the predictions are, that it will pass the Japanese yen within 2 or 3 more years. So, big stuff there, big changes. But at the same time, all this planning is going on, and we see the goal to make the Chinese currency a global reserve currency and to elevate its status and to make it more interesting and attractive abroad. Internally, with the war in Russia and the implications of China and everything that it's doing with the United States, has had some major effects on this relationship. So this internal part, especially when it comes to Chinese companies. So one of the big ways was to get international money still into the country through different companies. So I mentioned earlier selling ships. There's all kinds of ways to get stuff in. Right now, a lot of export stuff, they export all kinds of things, electronics and everything. So that's where the dollars are coming in. But the plan here is to actually make the companies attractive so that it'll bring foreign investment much more. But it looks like that's going backwards now. And this is also on Twitter, that the markets are basically imploding, and that Americans are withdrawing at a high rate investment over there. But internally, the Chinese people have been buying the dip. They've been stepping into the market. So at once, it might look like there's foreign money that's no longer coming in anymore. But the anticipation that it looks like President Xi had when he first announced this pivot from from export-led to dual circulation is that local people are actually starting to participate in the market more. Apparently before, it was almost impossible. It was just real estate, and they want to pivot real estate and make real estate not speculative, but actually add access to Chinese companies, to Chinese people, with all of the Americans currently bailing. And with all of that, a big announcement happened just yesterday, and this is from Sofia Horta Acosta, and I recommend anyone follow her on Twitter because she does these weekly resumes of what's going on in the Chinese economy. There's no politics to it. It looks like she might be a little bit of a fan of the Chinese economy. So if you're not into that, it could be irritating. I know sometimes when I see her put exclamations and like, wow, a bit like cheering the Chinese Communist Party on. I'm not so down with that, but the information is good. So, I continue to follow her. And what she said in reaction to this Chinese meltdown is that they pledged to keep capital markets stable. They're vowing to support all their companies overseas, and they'll buy those stocks if they need to keep valuations up. So a Chinese stock on an American exchange. And they're going to handle all the risks with property developers. So they're not going to allow defaults. The property market in China is probably a total scam, probably about to collapse entirely, just because it's been the only investable category for Chinese people for so long. It's their only savings deposit box, other than who has access to Bitcoin. It's really what has to be used over there. So, and then the last piece is that they've clarified they're going to end their big tech regulations of the stuff on Alibaba. I mean, how much you believe that, I don't know, but it looks like big tech anyway has, sort of been managed and controlled. Now, when you add all this together, the plan seems to be this. It seems to be to increase the energy capacity of the place by at once making Saudi Arabia and other oil producing countries take yuan as collateral, thereby making those places and expanding the yuan petro market, so oil for yuan. And then, one of the most amazing things, I don't know much about healthcare, so I'm going to go through these because I'm going to be giving the Bitcoin version of this in a second, but we've got the electricity here. I don't know much about healthcare in China, so I'm going to skip it. But it is a consideration because within this dual economic plan, it's all about the health of citizens and all that stuff. It's in the propaganda anyway. This piece here is really, really amazing. I don't know if you know this, but the Chinese have been reforesting the Gobi Desert at an astonishing rate, more than anyone has reforested deserts in the world, I think. And I know we talk about terraformation on the show from time to time, and we talk about Bitcoiners going to the desert, and we're going to talk about that again today. But just know that the Chinese are actually doing it. They've actually gone to parts of the Gobi Desert and have already terraformed it and are already farming again, because China is not like the United States in that there is no Mississippi River. There is no Mississippi Delta. There is no Mississippi watershed. The United States has a very unique and fertile land. Not everywhere in the world is like that, and not even close. And China had stuff like that apparently in its history, but overuse and ancient overuse, thousands of years or hundreds, have meant that parts of the Gobi Desert, which were once green, are no longer farmable, but they have become re-farmed again recently, just in the past few years. And their findings are actually incredible. What they've managed to do there, if you see some of the pictures and the videos, and using people from all around the world who have come in and really experimented. And China has been great at that with nuclear power, for example. Right now, it's only about 5% of their total energy supply. About 50 gigawatts of total energy in China is from nuclear, but they're going to put about 30% of that in the next few years more. So we'll be up to about 70%. Pretty soon, not quite 70, but sorry, 7%, not quite 7%, but moving up quickly, and that's about 70 gigawatts. So pretty interesting stuff. And then all of their work on infrastructure, we can't deny that they've been so successful. Their trains, the stations. I mean, it looks like there's some issues and some engineering troubles and a bit of corruption but all the kind of regular stuff. I don't think if we built a high-speed train across the United States today, we wouldn't see some troubling mistakes and things like that made. You got to give even the CCP, I think, credit on the train. Not to say that there aren't things you can condemn them for along the construction of it, what they did to Tibet with it. None of it is good, right? None of it is like not. A lot of the stuff that happened around the train, you could argue about. The train itself, the engineering feat, the ability for local Chinese people to ride on a beautiful train, high speed across their country to almost any place, is nevertheless an amazing achievement. Amazing. And I've been on it. I thought it was one of the most incredible things from, just seeing how far China had come, that this was possible, that people were riding this train. So we can't say that this international piece, whether or not they stole the technology for that to build those, this is a train line, by the way, this is infrastructure, if it makes any sense. So we got trees and a train. This is actually a street, but I don't think it's coming through, so we'll pretend it's a train. So we've got energy, health, reforestation, terraformation, really, and infrastructure and all that. Now, the way it should fill out is that they promise more property rights, right? That's that part to get more Americans to invest, and even locals, when they want to invest in things, apparently property rights are a big part of the second aspect of it, right? A big part of the second aspect of it. But of course, social credit is all attached to that, and social credit has all of these UBI implications, right? So if you are going to be on UBI in any country, I imagine there's going to be some kind of incentivization model around it to make sure that you do X, Y, and Z in order to qualify for the thing. So if anyone, even in America, thinks that UBI isn't going to be a massive dopamine dealing incentive manipulation structure, that's where it's headed. Whether we get a Bitcoin standard or not, I think there's going to be some form of consumption and incentivized behavioral manipulation. So that's all part of that internal piece. That's why social credit came on right now. It's to help really become more efficient between the consumption side, what things are costing, what people are buying, what people are doing, and the foreign side where the renminbi, the yuan is being pushed into energy markets in particular, and then national balance sheets after. So all of that's happening. Now, on our side, in the United States of America, an amazing thing happened yesterday. A favorite of this show, Michael Schellenberger, who wrote a book recently called San Francisco, and which actually ended up getting adopted almost instantly by London Breed, the mayor of San Francisco, to deal in a totally 180 way of the problems that have been dealt with for drug use and homelessness and all that stuff in San Francisco. Totally 180, adopted many of Michael Schellenberger's prescriptions. Michael Schellenberger, before his book San Francisco, actually targeted US energy and nuclear energy in particular as probably the easiest way to solve all global warming problems. He's a fellow who's testified in US Congress to both this and the homelessness problem. A really smart guy. He's running a lifelong Democrat. He's been in all kinds of environmental groups, Sierra Club in his life, and all that stuff. And now he's gonna be running as an independent. Usually you say independent, I don't know, they never win in the United States. It's two parties. Michael Schellenberger is different. And Michael Schellenberger, having led nuclear power in America, and also now even in San Francisco, you can see they have these $15,000 tiny homes set aside from the downtown core for homeless people to try and get into some degree of safety and away from drugs and try and get healthy. And it looks like these things, they're getting residents. They're already moving in. This is part of Michael Schellenberger's prescriptions here. Big into psilocybin as well as a health measure to help these people. And when you start seeing all the stuff that Michael Schellenberger and that's possible, the things he knows about, the things he's expert in, the things he can actually affect and change, and now his new candidacy for California, it helps us, or it can't force us, or we can't help ourselves but to go and picture what a Michael Schellenberger governorship looks like. And in the end, I think it could actually look a little bit like this Chinese dual circulation economic plan. It looks a little bit like this, and I'll explain why. Basically, you can, in the same way that people have this plan for the yuan to be a global reserve currency, a lot of people have that plan for Bitcoin, and it's being affected all over the place. We see it as savings technology, right? Instead of the balance sheet part where China is trying to convince other countries to put on their balance sheet, you see in Bitcoin, individuals are saving in it. So it's becoming a big part of personal balance sheets for sure. You see it used more and more as collateral. You hear a lot of Bitcoiners say it's the greatest collateral in the world. There isn't better collateral. It's pristine collateral. It's still risk on collateral according to Wall Street. But in a world where it's the reserve currency, of course, it's not risk on collateral anymore. And if it's not risk on collateral, there's a million things you can do with it, right? If it is that risk-free, almost like a government bond type collateral, there's a million things you can start doing it, even funding infrastructure that we never thought possible before. And if you add all that up together, we can do the energy with Bitcoin, we can do healthcare. I mean, Bitcoiners and psilocybin and health prevention, really with the diet, and we talk about that a lot. The reforestation piece, we talk about that a bit too, that Bitcoiners' diets with all the cows and the protein, really to reforest the desert, you can also just bring cows, and if they poo everywhere, you can start farming it with a bit of water in no time at all. And then infrastructure is one we don't really talk about too much, but we saw Bitcoin migrate, of course, infrastructure, machines across continents in a short amount of time. But my prediction is here, once this collateral piece becomes stronger, you're going to see way more funding of stuff that can really be effective. And one of them, Eisenhower built after World War II, the Eisenhower highway network around the United States. Well, here's an idea that I would like to contribute to the Michael Schellenberger California governorship campaign. And it's more or less this, that we've got all these people in California that are going to be like the journalists who don't know about what's going on in the world, and then you can't hire them because they're too stupid, and what are you going to do with them? So there is sort of this UBI need. I think, China acknowledged that there's people that they're going to have to feed. You're not going to be able to do it. And I think even Michael Schellenberger is not ever going to propose a plan without the correct amount of empathy in it to take care of the people on the streets of Los Angeles and the streets of San Francisco. I mean, he's building his entire campaign around empathy. And I think that's good. If Bitcoin is going to make it in the world, there's got to be a plan with a lot of empathy to deal with the people who ain't going to buy Bitcoin. Those journalists that are laughing at Kamala Harris and Herschel Walker, they're not going to be Bitcoiners anytime soon, I don't think, right? Like, they're going to take a long time to convince some of these people. So what do you do, right? What do you do? Well, here's the idea. Michael Schellenberger, if he becomes the governor of New York, we can guarantee one thing: the United States is going to get more nuclear power than we've ever had, and it's going to be in California because he's a fan. This is probably one of the other reasons why he's running. He really wants nuclear power to be the main driver of American technology. But here's the idea. We talk a lot about nuclear power, Bitcoiners buying a nuclear mine. I'm talking about something even different here. I'm talking about Bitcoin being used as collateral to finance the purchase of a nuclear mine in order to terraform land. And you can do that in California. California has enough desert that if you finance nuclear powered Bitcoin mining reforestation, I don't think a sentence that's ever been spoken in English before, but it's a real sentence. Everything you need to know is there. Nuclear powered Bitcoin mining terraformation. And basically using Bitcoin as collateral to build a mine at the same time as putting it in a place that could use terraformation, using the energy, and then doing what China did in the Gobi Desert to remake it. The infrastructure piece, the part where I was mentioning Eisenhower's highways and all that stuff, well, here's another thing. So I'll be in Vermont this year. I'm going to be buying a little property on a river, and I'm going to run a little EV store out of it, like a modification of bicycles, modification of whatever you want. And there's a 40-mile stretch of former rail path along a river that goes all the way to Lake Champlain. And I'm going to be building bikes, putting electric motors on them, and hopefully get a fleet. Well, what if there was some kind of toll, just a Bitcoin, right? Not a whole Bitcoin, but some Bitcoin, right? Where people put Bitcoin, voluntarily, if you took the track, you could put a bit of Bitcoin in. That Bitcoin could become collateral to then finance more track, just built independently. Unlike Eisenhower, who needed to engineer a uniform highway for automobiles, I'm talking about bike paths. I mean, they can cost almost nothing to build, almost nothing. And as long as someone can borrow a bit of money, get a bit of work, get paid to create a track, we can actually expand track decentrally around the United States. We can actually have EV electric bike networks that cross the entire country. And we can probably finance it through some Bitcoin scheme somehow, using its collateral, using a toll as collateral. And you can imagine all kinds of things on the track that would be useful, eating, and people would pay like a rent in order to be on there for the track as well. All stuff that would help upkeep the track and make the track useful for everyone. And in the end, with this scheme, you could have some crushed stone, some paved, some cobblestone. You can start imagining a world where, people, anyone for not a lot of money can come to America, travel the whole country, stay in some pretty inexpensive housing, use the network, and get cheap energy. And maybe not see the desert, because there might not be any deserts anymore. We might make all the deserts beautiful and green, and we'll have more parks. I guess we'll have to leave the Grand Canyon alone because it's the most amazing place in the universe. But there'll be some green, beautiful stuff in places that were, inhospitable before. So Michael Schellenberger running, we got to get Bitcoin in front of him. We got to help him think through a bike plan. This is still a work in progress, the bike plan piece, but it can work. It can work. So that's the show. We use the Chinese model of the dual circulation economic strategy. And I didn't tell you the best part. What is the UBI? What do we pay them? It's US dollars, of course. I mean, that's the consumption money. These guys went for years. They went on and on and on and on and on and on for years about how to measure inflation. In the end, they made it the price of a candy bar. So I say they get what they asked for. I say if they take out real estate, if they take out all these things from the calculation of CPI over the years, and they make CPI the consumer number, well, you get what you asked for. Candy bar money, coffee money, UBI.
Awesome, Nolan. That was quite the lesson. We are running up against the clock as we do have deep dive starting up after this. But stick around through this commercial break. We're going to be spinning up a Twitter Spaces for that. We're going to be joined momentarily by Dylan LeClair and Sam Rule. The Fed has just announced what they're going to be doing as far as raising rates and whatnot. So stick around for this commercial break, and we're excited to dive into all of that stuff with our market experts. And as always, use code YTMAG to get 10% off of all conference tickets. What is up, guys? Thank you for being with us. Shout out to everyone who is over on Twitter. We'll be pinning a link so you can see our pretty faces and some of the graphics and images that Dylan and Sam have prepared for today's segment. But we've got to kick things off with Jerome Powell and the FOMC meeting that is more or less happening live. But the big news out of there is the Fed putting a 25 basis point hike. I don't think anyone here was not expecting that, but I'd love to get Dylan and Sam's initial thoughts right there.
Yeah, I can hop in. I think it was totally expected. They're kind of forced to raise with this inflationary environment, but more so, I believe it's more just signaling than anything, in the sense that the Treasury market is doing the tightening for them. If you just look at the short end of the Treasury curve, yields have been ripping really since November, but they've accelerated with the conflict in Russia or in Ukraine with Russia, and the kind of the commodity shortages that will result from that, especially energy markets. And so really, I mean, they're forced to tighten, but more so it's fixed income. The bond market is doing that for them. And so that's what, Sam and I have been doing a lot of analysis. We're obviously incorporating on-chain stuff, derivative stuff, but really the driver, if you're looking at the Bitcoin market today, is entirely due to this kind of marginal seller, marginal buyer, and the liquidity in the macro, in the kind of global financial system, and everything's kind of driven by the dollar. And so, that's what's really driving this. And, maybe they were going to shock the world with a 50 basis point hike, but, Jerome Powell's dovish kind of history said otherwise, and, is more in line with expectations than anything else.
Yeah, I'll just step in here too. Hate to cut it short. Actually, I was watching the Q&A presser, but this will be fun to talk through. Yeah, I mean, I think initial takeaway, our base case coming into this was 25 bips as expected in the market. We got a chart to show how volatile that can be in expectations in previous months. So we'll be looking at some of the CME data we can talk through later. See what the next rate hike probabilities will be. I think a lot of good analysts, Jim Bianco, many others, were like beating the drum that inflation is at the point now that they just cannot avoid and they have to come out. Whether you could say it's a hawkish surprise to the upside, the dot plot is much higher than expected. A lot of growth cuts to inflation, growth cuts to GDP for the year from 4% down to 2.8%, which is huge. We talked through some of the deflationary impacts there as well. Inflation forecast up, 4.3 to 2.6. So I think now when you have the entire committee and you had one dissenting opinion from Bullard on the committee as well, that wanted the 50 basis point hike. So I think there's clearly from the Q&A, kind of answers I saw from Powell today, is it's all about a really tight monetary policy stance, price stability, fixing inflation, whatever they need to do in those means possible, whether their policies can help do that or not, seem to be much more of a surprise hawkish in at least their expectations for inflation, GDP, and the dot plot overall.
I'm curious your guys' thoughts on this idea of, if they want to tighten up policy, they want to essentially do their best to control the money inflow and outflow. Do you think they are signaling or will signal some sort of price control or price fixing for goods, whether it be oil, gas costs, or even just food costs? Is that something you think the Fed or the government is going to step into at some point?
I don't think that's in the range of kind of abilities for the Fed to do. Definitely something that the federal government could probably try to attempt to do. I mean, it's a disastrous policy. Food shortages, we've seen what this has led to in the past. It leads to famine. It leads to really disastrous outcomes. So, hopefully not, but, leave it up to our policymakers to attempt to do something like that. It ultimately disincentivizes production. This is a supply side driven commodity shortage, energy shortage. And so, higher prices are just a result of that supply and demand imbalance. And so I think ultimately this is why the Fed's in such a tough position, because it's really not, I mean, I guess you could say it's driven by decades of monetary policy, but it's not this current inflationary regime, especially as of the last month or two, is not driven by Fed policy, but rather shortages in real physical goods. And so, trying to tighten monetary policy at the same time that credit and fixed income is already doing it for them, with volatility elevated across the board, whether you're looking at commodities, equities, fixed income, or foreign exchange. I mean, the elevated volatility across the board. You're still seeing Powell say, we don't think there's an elevated chance of a recession. I'll take the other side of that bet. And ultimately, I think this volatility, especially in the legacy system, I mean, in Bitcoin's just been chopping around, but I think it's here to stay, and probably accelerates.
I do find it really interesting that, the Fed is trying to restrict inflation when a lot of the price increases kind of have nothing to do with monetary policy, or maybe only have marginally to do with monetary policy. I'm kind of curious, how hard do things need to get for them to change course? It sounds like they're talking a really strong game right now based on what Sam is saying from watching the interviews. I'm kind of curious, Are they talking, are they just talking a big game right now and are gonna have to 180 soon? Or do you think that they're gonna just press on with this higher rate strategy?
Then you want to give it a go?
Yeah, sure. I think it's always a tough one because I think it is a lot of high talk game all the time. I think this is probably pretty unprecedented in what they're trying to do. And my takeaway from this, and after looking at a lot of different research and analysis and opinions across a lot of people smarter than me and trying to dissect that, is that the Fed is going to come out and really try to tighten aggressively this year as much as they can until there's something much bigger in the markets that are breaking even further than what we have today, and really where they have no choice to step in and try to do something to help out that economic situation. But I think at this point, it's all focused on bringing down inflation as much as they can. We saw some tightening policy with the ECB as well. So had a lot more talk today and conversations around expectations to run down the balance sheet, whether they can do that or not. It seems absolutely from this conversation, at least from what they've had previously, much tougher stances on what they're trying to do there. So maybe we go through a series of a few more rate hikes into tighter monetary policy and see how much kind of the market can withstand higher rates at this point before some type of credit unwinding situation or some bigger break there.
I think one of the really interesting things to look at right now is the yield curve. So take the 10-year Treasury, the 2-year Treasury, and subtract the 2-year from that. And I pinned it at the top of the nest on Twitter. But it's basically, and there's 2 separate tweets. One of them is like a kind of a long-term view, and one of them is a like more of a 2-month view. And basically, a yield curve inversion has predated every single recession since the 60s. And it was just one miss in the 60s, one false signal, but then it predated all of like the Great Depression and recessions previous to that. So what it means and why a 2-year Treasury yielding higher than a 10-year signals potentially that a recession is coming is just because of how the plumbing in the financial system is designed. So creditors, whether that's financial institutions, banks, et cetera, borrow long to lend short. So they take on short dated liabilities to acquire long dated assets, which is, they extend credit to consumers, corporates, et cetera. And so when those yields invert, when that yield curve goes below zero, what you see is that the liquidity really dries up in the system because whether it's from inflationary pressures or just deteriorating credit conditions, it no longer makes sense to borrow short to lend long when those rates are inverted. And so we've seen really just that yield curve in particular really flatten in a big way over the last 4 months, but in particular in 2022. And that's just kind of another one of the things that we're looking at that says from the legacy side of things that a recession is coming, regardless of whatever the Fed is saying.
Just a quick reminder to everyone on the Twitter Spaces, pop over to YouTube where you can actually see these charts live as Dylan goes over it, and you can see everyone's pretty faces as well. CK, I know you were itching to ask something.
No, you just beat me to it. It's the second to last pinned tweet can take you straight to the YouTube. And yeah, I mean, we're playing the charts, right? You want to check out the charts. That's the best way to get this information. But yeah, I want to send it back to Dylan and Sam. Anything more on the Fed talk that we want to discuss, or should we move over to Bitcoin price, etc.?
I think the one last thing I'd say, I was like legacy markets is it's interesting just to kind of see the data points from the Michigan Consumer Sentiment Survey, which is actually which basically just kind of is a survey that gauges households in the U.S. and their kind of feeling about the current economy, and that's below the 2020 lows, below COVID, and so this is before any potential recession is official. And that's because of obviously soaring energy prices, and increasingly this is kind of developing under the surface. But these higher yields as a result of credit selling off really impacts, the mortgage rates, that anything that's variable, APR is going to start rising up in a pretty big way. And so it's just interesting to see that, despite not being in a recession, we're nearing those kind of great financial crisis levels of consumer sentiment. And so despite not being in technically a bear market for the S&P or a recession yet, consumers are feeling it at the gas pumps. They're feeling this inflation, and it definitely doesn't seem like we're in the upswing of an economic cycle.
Is it fair to say that consumers are feeling like inflation specifically, or are they feeling supply chain breakdowns? I mean, probably a combination of both, but it seems like it's oversimplified too much.
Sorry, I was muted. That's a great point. I think really it's kind of like the answers are combined in the sense that the supply chain disruptions lead to prices spiking, leads to this inflationary impulse. And I think we're kind of seeing also with like the Russia-Ukraine war and the kind of increasing protectionism from all of these commodity exporters around the world, whether that's South American countries and agriculture or just energy producers in general. This past really 50 years has been kind of a real breakthrough in global trade that the U.S. led through their military industrial complex and the petrodollar. And so while that system hasn't completely broke down, we're seeing the trend is somewhat reversing in a pretty material sort of way. And so that leads to just further inflationary pressures, that we haven't seen, that consumers haven't felt, especially in the U.S. over the last, say, 2 decades, even though we had financial assets going, up and to the right.
Yeah, I would add a couple of things too. Just add on one to that. At the same time, you're seeing like consumer sentiment go down, seeing financial assets, high risk assets, high beta assets that people own and people's portfolios drawing down, bonds going down too. So at the same time, you're getting these inflationary pressures. You're also getting lower wealth across the board for people who own those financial assets, which is a bad recipe. What I wanted to highlight just from the FOMC meeting too, is to not, definitely don't downplay the growth decline in their expectations from 4% to 2.8%, and then the inflation rise from 4.3 to 2.6. This comes just after a week where the ECB essentially did the same thing. They rolled back some of their growth already for 2022. They increased their inflation. Typically from our research, what we've been watching is that consensus growth forecasts across the board are all elevated, especially compared to 3, 5 year, 10-year trends of growth that we've seen in economies before. So expecting to see probably more GDP forecast growth decline. Saw that in Conference Board, which is an organization that does a series of leading lagging indicators as well for the United States, not just in the Fed. So as that picks up to this inflationary impulse over the next few months, however long it plays out, just kind of puts more pressure on a deflationary impulse as prices begin to get too high and rise for consumers. And that puts a real drag on growth in the long term as well.
Speaking of stocks trending down, I know Q has a question, but it's really interesting seeing some of the stocks and tech stocks in particular reach their March 13th, 2020 price levels. That was during that massive crash down. The slide this time has been a little bit more gradual, but we're reaching those, reaching to the point where we're erasing almost the entirety of that kind of stimulus pump throughout the last 2 years.
Yeah, I think that's just kind of going back to because of this inflationary, paradoxically, it's like you would think that high inflation is good for, equities, right? Just because, just money supply is growing, but really that's not what's happening. It's that higher inflation, again, to go back to credit, leads to these higher yields in credit markets because fixed income investors don't want fixed income when CPI is accelerating, which, and if you think about tech in particular, a lot of this like high growth, often no profit names, they're really being priced using what was really deeply negative real yields, and they're priced as like duration assets. So these huge earnings forecasts or revenue forecasts and these really large multiples that they're priced off of those numbers or those expectations. As these discount rates rise, they're priced on lower and lower levels. And so that's what's really happened. And we haven't yet seen the kind of illiquidity, insolvency risk that comes with higher financing costs priced in yet. It's more so just been kind of an earnings multiple squash, if you will.
I'm curious your guys' thoughts on, yes, we know that a lot of the tech stocks are trading at future earnings and future valuations. However, at the same time, the expectation of a 25 basis point hike, everyone and their mother knew it was a rate hike was coming. It became very clear that it was going to go from 50 down to 25. We're seeing the market not necessarily make new highs, but you have volume at an increased level from yesterday. You have the NASDAQ, I think, as of right now, if I have my number up correctly, is up 2.4%. How much of the hype and cycle are you guys buying into versus what these actions that the Fed is doing that is affecting the market, or what they're talking about doing that has been affecting the market?
You want to take that, Sam?
Yeah, I think it's fair. I mean, I think, the Fed is more signaling to the market of expectations and what's on the horizon, and having the market, essentially, like Dylan said before, the market is doing the tightening for them, essentially. So I don't know how impactful we'll necessarily say like a 25 bips rate hike. Everyone knows expectations are coming. I think it really all depends on just the rate of change and their sentiment over the next few months of how fast they want to tighten. So essentially saying that like they want to be above the neutral rate, which is 2.5% federal funds rate by 2024 or so, and start to make moves toward that, is probably another signal to the market to see how higher rates need to go outside the Fed. So I don't know if it's necessarily the Fed's impact on that just from the meeting itself, but maybe the rate of change in expectations and what they're signaling, what they want to do with monetary policy, and then how the market reacts to that.
I would just like to add that it is, I think it's extremely archaic that we are, despite its significance, and there is a lot of significance to, the FOMC meeting and what they do with rates and what, Powell signals. I think Lynn Alden posted a fantastic meme of, some like old grandpa sitting around a circle of like young children explaining, he's like, back in my day, we used to listen to a man decide the price of money, or like I may have fumbled like the actual right meme explanation, but I think it is quite archaic, and it highlights just how superior a programmatic monetary policy is, and open source software kind of leading all this. So there is big kind of implications of what these credit markets are saying. If the Fed raised interest rates by 1% tomorrow, like 1% today unexpectedly, I mean, that wasn't on the table, but every asset in the planet would crash, which is why this matters. But I think in the future, 10 years out from now, 20, whatever it is, maybe 5, I think we'll see just how truly kind of archaic this whole process is with Fed governors and 12 guys in ties in a room deciding the price of money.
You're telling me a bunch of lawyers don't know what to do with the financial policy of the world? To kind of go off of that a little bit, though, I am curious. Sam, you mentioned that the market essentially was doing this for them. We know what the yield curve sits at, and based on that, we can expect 4 25-point basis hikes. Should the yield curve change drastically, that should help us as investors gauge what the market may do, and as a result, what the Fed may do. A hypothetical scenario, and this might just be because I smoked a little bit too much weed this morning, but what, if any, sort of effect would there be on just the global markets if you remove the Fed and let the actual market itself, let that yield curve dictate, hey, every quarter we're going to update monetary policy. All the banks have to go off of what the market is dictating rather than what 12 guys in a suit in a room decide to do?
That's a great question. I guess I've never thought of like the market implications of just like outright removing the Fed entirely. It'd probably be disastrous, as the whole system is built upon monetary policy that they signal, dictate assets that they own. It's all connected in such a way that personally never thought about what that would mean if we just remove it and let the market decide. In a lot of ways, I think the market does decide without them. And then if you have, like Dylan mentioned, these higher, Volcker style announcements or 1%, 2% increases in rates can affect it. But it seems that the market does, a decent job of doing it, kind of with or without like increase, like, or at least minor signaling by the Fed. I'm not sure, Dylan, if you have any extra thoughts there you want to add.
Yeah, I think the market is in control for the most part, a majority of the time, despite the Fed's fund rate. I mean, it's obviously significant, but you'll see that the Treasury market and investors in general dictate where the market goes. And so I think it's just during the times of massive illiquidity, just because of the dynamics of how much credit is in the system, how many IOUs are in the system, and the implicit like short dollar trade that everyone is participating in, not only in the US, but the dollar being the world reserve currency, everybody has dollar denominated debt, dollar liabilities. And so when there's a dollar squeeze, when there's some sort of slowdown in economic activity and insolvencies start to build, what you see is kind of a dash for cash, dash for the dollar. And what happens is you don't sell what you want, you sell what you can, because you have an asset liability mismatch. And so that's when kind of the lender of last resort, Federal Reserve, comes in 2008, in 2020. And really just kind of anytime the market throws a tantrum and the Fed steps in with either rate cuts, which now they have 25 basis points in their holster to cut whole 25 bips, as well as with quantitative easing, monetizing the debt that the market puked up. And so in terms of like what a market would look like without it, I think it can function for, periodically, maybe for long periods of time. But it's really during this kind of moments of vast illiquidity and volatility where when things go wrong, and like ultimately, I think they try to taper, they try to raise rates, and really the market, because of this high inflation, leads to higher financing costs and eventually a recession where a volatility event, liquidity kind of cascade leads to them implementing yield curve control. That's probably the end game, and how long that takes is anyone's guess. But they're fine to kind of auto roll it off until that event occurs, where they probably put the entire credit market on their balance sheet by the end of the decade.
Well, that's what Bitcoin's for, y'all. Bitcoin is the market removing and automating away that process. Fam, I actually have to bounce. I'm getting kicked out of the studio I'm holding down. But for everyone on the spaces, go check out YouTube. Second to last pinned tweet in the nest. We're showing charts on YouTube. You can see Dylan and Sam's face. And come to Bitcoin 2022. Exactly 3 weeks away, 21 days from now, we'll be gathering in Miami. So be there or be a no coiner. Catch you later. Peace.
Damn it, Pete Rizzo. So I guess this is a great opportunity, though, for us to start to dive in a little bit more on some of the things on chain that Dylan and Sam are seeing. I'd love to just sort of let you guys, I know you shared some slides you wanted to dive into. Is there a specific chart you'd love to share or have us pull up?
Yeah, we get a series. We can just go from the top. I think we've got some macro charts, maybe illustrate some of the stuff that we've been talking about. We can just highlight more in depth, spend time. Are you guys sharing it now? Okay, cool. And then we've got some kind of on-chain dynamics that we can talk through. I think a lot of what Dylan and I's focus has been on, especially over the last couple of months, is trying to get a handle on what this macro thesis is, what ours is for Bitcoin, what it means for macro globally this year, deflationary, inflationary, and what's going to happen in what market regime. The first piece we got up here is just a CPI and kind of PPI chart, PPI being producer price index, just the price, goods and services that consumers are paying producers in the United States right now. And just showing, that March kind of 2020 COVID pandemic, kind of unprecedented fiscal and monetary policy that started. Then you have this accelerating trend now of CPI and PPI that for a long time, consensus wise, a lot of people were expecting in Q1, even our initial, thoughts in December that inflation would remain incredibly highly elevated, even though whatever you think of the CPI, the rate of change in here is, really the most important piece. And but now that we're not going to get that in terms of the commodity shock, the energy prices that we're getting, and now we're seeing even on the PPI side, just from the data that came out yesterday, that gasoline necessarily accounted for 40% of the PPI increase that we saw. And that was probably only including a couple weeks of really the relevance of the first and second order effects that are playing out with oil. So right now we're just in this incredibly inflationary accelerating trend. Expect that next month to be even worse, as the CPI came out for PPI, not capturing a lot of what the commodity price shocks were, energy price shocks that are going to sink into the US. So this is I think we're keeping a close eye on, like, when this inflationary pulse starts to turn over and starts to be more deflationary. But really, just going to continually get shocks to the upside here. And I would say from the PPI perspective, producer price index, this is relatively still incredibly low to what we're seeing on kind of the European Union side. So take something like Italy, we talked about Italy electricity prices are necessarily in hyperinflation mode, up 50%. Their PPI is up 30-40%. So I think we're far from seeing this inflationary impulse subside. And I think that's, also just connecting that back, a big reason of kind of the Fed's more hawkish tone today.
Yeah, in terms of like you asked about on-chain metrics, very broadly, without even digging into like specific metrics in general, there is a very tight supply or tight free float in the Bitcoin market. It's just that, again, marginal selling, marginal buying price is decided at the margin. And so ultimately what leads to these parabolic runs in the Bitcoin price is that you see this supply demand imbalance build under the surface, often for weeks, months, quarters, years, often. Say post 2017 bull run, there was almost a 3-year accumulation, and that really accelerated in 2020. And then just kind of, that wall of money became so strong and price broke out, and then, the chart, the hype, it's just almost reflexive, and the price goes parabolic. And I think we're priming for that stage at the moment. And while, the macro traders, hedge funds are, looking at what Jerome Powell is saying, you have under the surface convicted Bitcoiners just eating away at that free float of supply. And so, I think off the top of my head, I believe supply held for 1 year as a percentage of circulating supply in Bitcoin is about 1% or 0.5% away, ticks away from its all-time high measure. And I think 3 months supply held that hasn't moved is quite the same. It's almost at that all-time high level. So just again, what that tells us is while that wall of demand isn't in the market today, and maybe won't come back to the market until these headwinds or tailwinds pass. Really, when they do come, because they will, because there's a couple $100 trillion of capital stuck in this fiat system that's guaranteed, especially from the bondholder side, to lose money in this regime. That because of that reality, they're going to have to come to Bitcoin. And when they do, is it in 2022? Potentially, but until we see that change, we're gonna remain cautious. I think Bitcoin is range bound, but when that does change, I think people need to expect Bitcoin to absolutely rip. So that's kind of our thesis with on-chain stuff. I mean, we didn't throw too many direct metrics in the slides. We have some of them, just kind of like price heat maps and stuff about what whales are doing, and we can show that. But really, that's more of our thesis, and that's why we've been focusing so much on credit markets with our analysis, is because that's the driver for the time being. The supply side in Bitcoin can be as tight as ever, but if there's not that money flowing in at the margin, then it's not going to really make an impact on that market price.
So what you're saying is we're in the middle of a dead cat bounce above 40K.
I mean, that's tough. Intraday, intra-week. There's the good news is for Bitcoin bulls is that the risk premia that exists in Bitcoin in terms of derivatives and long speculation, whether that's the futures basis, so you can see how, you know, whether people are speculating on the 3-month forward, 6-month forward futures price during bull markets. Traditionally, that's, you know, we see like a 10%, 20%, 30% basis spread over the spot price. And right now we see almost nothing. So in terms of like, you know, how over leveraged speculators are in the crypto Bitcoin market, they're not. So, I mean, that is definitely, along with the kind of the supply side, the bull case. Just, you know, in terms of the backdrop, you don't see 3% intraday, you know, 3% positive, 3% negative swings in equities during a bull market. You don't see the VIX basically above 30 consistently during a bull market. And so I think, you know, intermediate term, like if you're interested in trading, you're essentially just trading like a levered S&P 500 or NASDAQ, which is like, you know, dependent on Ukraine and Russia and whatever Walter Bloomberg tweets out. So it's like, you know, if you're trying to successfully day trade this, good luck. But over, you know, on a long time frame, 40,000, middle $30,000 Bitcoin is extremely attractive, and it could go lower, most definitely, especially if, you know, the legacy market completely blows up. And that's you know, a pretty non-zero chance. But I think on a long-term time frame, buying Bitcoin at the same price as it, you know, was in the early stages of 2021, despite all that's happened and, you know, the maturation of the asset class, is extremely attractive. And that's why, you know, if you have no mark-to-market leverage and are just stacking stacks to cold storage, you're gonna do fantastic over a long term.
Yeah, I would just add to that too. I mean, whether you look at it, I think generally, you know, my base case, I lean towards that possible liquidity event, credit unwinding, more of a capitulation event to come for risk assets, Bitcoin included. Whether you think that or not, at the levels we're at today, 50% drawdown off the high is still an attractive long-term 2, 3, 5, 10-year price to accumulate Bitcoin at. And in the data too, we can show some of these charts as well. We saw some of that accumulating in January after we had, you know, Dylan was talking about kind of the speculation derivatives impulse leaving. The annualized basis in November had come down from 18% for that cash and carry trade down to 6% into December, now down to 3 or less than that now. And then when kind of that selling, kind of that speculation left, selling left, open interest in US dollar terms goes down 40%. We did see some accumulation there on the whale side, on the fund flow side, accumulation trends and charts that we can look through Glassnode to see that people were picking up Bitcoin at those prices. I think now it's a little bit less of an accumulation period, a lot of uncertainty. Obviously, we've been in this chopping range, you know, 35 to 45K Bitcoin. Short-term holder realized price is right around 46,000, which is a level we use from an on-chain perspective to say, you know, hey, it's probably bullish beyond that if we can break away. So, you know, I think there's a lot of cases to be made on the scenarios of more of a bullish upside now or a catalyst to the downside. I think generally we lean, my base case, leaning more towards a downside capitulation event happening. But even in that case, just getting bullish confirmation if you're looking to stack a little bit more above that 46 to 50K range is still long-term, very small over the next 5-10 years.
Yeah, I think also, you know, just the reason we're talking so much about this, you know, the macro environment, I understand people don't care. And honestly, I don't really care too much about treasury bonds and the yields they spin off. But just when you're thinking about Bitcoin as an asset and its maturation, Bitcoin at $1 trillion market cap, or say 800 billion, is much more at the whims of this kind of macro liquidity tide than it was at $100 billion market cap or a $10 billion market cap or a $1 million market cap, whatever price was around there. I mean, so, you know, as we go on, I think when Bitcoin is 2 trillion, 10 trillion, et cetera, like it's going to be the most pure reflection of credit expansion or credit contraction. It's going to be the most pure reflection of, you know, the state of the legacy system. And so I think that's why we focus so much on it. You know, I think some people with our deep dive subscription want to see just Bitcoin talk. Why are you quoting equity market volatility when you're talking about the Bitcoin price? But the reality is, as Bitcoin grows bigger and bigger as an asset, it's more and more directly kind of interconnected with these markets.
It's easily why, and I'm not being a home team favorite or anything like that. I read a lot of different on-chain analysts' work. It's one of my favorite things about the deep dive segment, the fact that you don't ignore the global macro issues and relate that back into Bitcoin as well. If you are watching, if you are listening and you are not yet subscribed to the deep dive, what are you doing? Go ahead, make sure you add your email. There is a free tier. Once you get on that free tier, you're never going to want to stop. I do want to mention this breaking news. A few of our colleagues have highlighted this, as well as Eastside Tony. There has been a data breach at Unchained Capital. If you have or are a customer of them, make sure you check the email and just go through whatever they need. But please make sure that all of your data and information is safe. We're going to dive now right back into everything that we've been talking about. Just wanted to highlight that for our viewers and listeners out there. One of the things that, got brought up at the end of last week was the producer price index now officially being listed as above 10%. We have yet to see the CPI reach that level. I myself bang that drum of these numbers are all made up. They're going to give you a percent that you want. As a data analyst, I know how to play with numbers well enough to give you a number that you ask for as either a client or a customer. What effect do you think this, now that we have reached sort of that psychological hurdle, if you will, of an above 10% price index number or an inflationary number, what effect do you think that's going to have, I think, for the rest of this year?
Just my general thoughts is, I think regardless of whether, you believe the number, have a different number in mind of what you look at, I would just apply whatever rate of change of the number that comes out is really in line, especially with what expectations in the markets are already pricing in. That's really going to change if people are diving more into inflation hedges or if they're not on the other side. Obviously, gold is going to continue probably to be pretty strong through the year as the dominant inflation hedge that it's been. Long term, you can make a case that over time and over Bitcoin cycles, it's been that inflation style hedge. I think a lot of portfolio managers, allocators would push back on that traditional assumption of that. I think Bitcoiners would continue to say that, hey, this is, if I'm holding this thing 4 or 5 years down the road, I want this to be my inflation hedge short term. Looks like gold is probably going to take a lot of those flows, and probably commodities as well, still staying pretty strong through the year. So that's kind of my 2 cents. I would say, yeah, again, just reiterate, look at the rate of change in inflation. That's really what is driving a lot of the new market pricing when these things are announced.
Would love you guys' thoughts also just on, we're seeing and feeling a lot of inflation here stateside, internationally as well. Some countries have it worse than others. Are you guys paying attention to any particular foreign markets as far as broader impacts, both domestically as well as on Bitcoin at large?
Yeah, I think, Bitcoin is correlated until it's not. And the periods of decoupling that you'll see oftentimes, whether it's a result of, market makers just running out of liquidity on either the bid or the ask, or derivative dislocations that will cause, 10-15% spike intraday when equities are down or up. Like that's something that, can arise at any point. It just, when really what we're looking at in terms of international markets is commodities. And it's like, okay, how does commodities impact the price of Bitcoin? Well, higher commodity prices, higher inflation leads to further deterioration in these credit markets, leads to higher illiquidity, volatility, and probably steeper sell-off in equity markets. And most likely, it just speeds up the inevitability of this regime of yield curve control. And ultimately, probably, unfortunately, and I've said this a few times, I said this on a pod with Peter McCormick yesterday, I think, unfortunately, and this is why I'm such a long-term Bitcoin bull, and despite, the current market risks, and I think potentially the high chance of recession in 2022, why I own more Bitcoin than ever, and I'm not going to be net short by any means, is because I think the left and right tail of, this deflationary bust, just like, devastating depression, and on the other end of the tail, hyperinflation, whether that's by like technical definition, I don't even know what that is, like 50% month over month, or just, in general, like what we see usually in emerging markets, right? Like a currency collapse, not CPI at 5% or 8% or 10%. I think those tail outcomes, unfortunately, are not so unlikely, and that they aren't actually tail outcomes at all, and more so are probably in the cards, in the sense that it's somewhat of a binary outcome over the coming decade, and it probably doesn't even get close to taking that long. So that's why I own Bitcoin, in the sense that, if there is a massive deflationary bust, you want to own something with no counterparty risk, with a production cost that's liquid. And if, the Fed implements yield curve control into an inflationary impulse because credit markets are melting down, then we'll probably see, hyperinflation is a scary word because of what happens in nations or around the world when that occurs. But that probably is the outcome of yield curve control. It's printing any amount of money at any price to keep financing costs low in a real good shortage. And so, that's why, despite all the kind of bearish outlook on the timeline recently, you should continue to stack Bitcoin, maybe stack a little bit of extra cash on the side, be ready to buy blood, to buy blood on the streets, to buy knives, in the sense of knives on the chart, not real knives. But yeah, I think just because the end game is somewhat binary in that sense, Bitcoin is a must own, even if, 30K is possible. Is it probable? How probable? That's anyone's guess. But, that's why Bitcoin is a must own asset.
I want to reiterate for everyone really quickly, Sam, sorry to cut you off. We are never really actually predicting price here. We are simply trying to interpret the information. So do not hold Dylan accountable for when Bitcoin does get to 30K and we all get those cheap sats, or if it does just blast off and rocket from here. Sam, I'm sorry I cut you off, man.
No, you're good. It's a great point. I'll just add on to that, we're trying to figure out market intelligence data signals, interpret that as best we can, just like anyone else. So as most analysts out there, get things right, get things wrong. But I'm just going to add on to your international point, thinking about, okay, inflationary, hyperinflationary pressures, risk are rising for a lot of places outside the US, worse than that. So what was interesting and promising to me, although it was a glimpse, and I hope it stays and we see more of it with Bitcoin, is during a lot of the macro uncertainty in the Russia-Ukraine conflict, we saw that Bitcoin surge, like spot bid price, into like mid 40s. And so all of a sudden you see this extra demand that wasn't here before. And I know the Block and Coinmetrics, they posted some great analysis and charts. I'm looking at kind of Binance activity, exchange activity in Ukrainian currency and the ruble currency, and showing the kind of 3 or 4 times spike in volume for Bitcoin there. So I think those are good data sources to look at and get an idea of when these things are happening. You can also look at Bitcoin, and I know we've looked at it in Russian ruble terms, but we looked at Bitcoin and Russian ruble versus other commodities things in rubles as well, to try to understand the difference between those. So obviously everything in a currency collapse is going to start to make all-time highs against that. But it was promising to see that. It, short-lived, that demand seems there and relevant, and people fleeing to Bitcoin in kind of a release valve, safe haven type of way. But again, if the narrative has to hold up in the data for that to be more long-term. So good to see a glimpse. Hope we see more of that over the next couple of years.
Thank you for highlighting that, Sam. I know we're going to be wrapping up here shortly, and I have not yet had the opportunity to ask either of you. I'm just going to call it a little bit of a whale report, but what are you seeing whales doing, and what effect is that having on anything Bitcoin or at large?
Sure, I can jump in here, Dylan, add what you like. We could probably, if you guys want to share the whale and retail entity supply chart that we have up here, I think it's number 13 in the deck. We can just cover a little bit about how we analyze this from an on-chain perspective. One, I'll just emphasize that isolating whales activities across these entities is really difficult from an on-chain perspective. So I would take this in an aggregate view, grain of salt. There's a lot of different cuts and ways you can try to isolate whales. Whale Map is a new company that does this, puts the kind of whale activity on a price chart as well. That has some good information, but kind of an aggregate way I like to look at it is we look at supply held by entities, which are developed by Glassnode, clustering of addresses, data heuristics to try to look at entities that hold a certain amount of Bitcoin supply. So whales in this case are these entities that hold over 1,000 Bitcoin. And then we take away exchange balances, but we keep any known entities. So let's say we know that like Purpose Bitcoin ETF has this much Bitcoin, they're included in here. MicroStrategies would be included in this. Some of the on-chain dynamics are changing a little bit because a lot of whales break down their holdings into much smaller balances accounts too. So again, a lot of moving data and noise in here. What I would say overall is I mentioned that kind of accumulation period that we saw. So if you're looking at this chart, kind of these recent blue dots in the beginning of 2022, January, anytime you see these blue dots or when whale and retail kind of 30-day change in that supply I talked about is going up. And then when you see red and then orange, that's when whales are going down. The orange is when retail is going up. So what we've seen over the last few weeks is mostly whales, that supply going down, 30-day change. So that's a rough way to say that not so much accumulation from that side is happening right now. Probably a lot to do with the chop range that we're in, a lot of uncertainty taking place. Not to say that certain whales aren't making moves and buying, but in aggregate, it's kind of what it looks like. And then we had that increased kind of accumulation period in January. And then some of these lines here are just to isolate times when we saw kind of biggest drawdowns in like 30-day change percent whale supply, which tend to be either, more bearish trends, tops, or things that are playing out. Potentially could be the case, although there's the upside to be had as well. But we can go to the next chart as well. It's a Glassnode accumulation score, which kind of help people think about this help people think about this in another angle. So Glassnode just came out with this. This is not whale or retail specific, but this is just net accumulation kind of on the network. Being dark purple is really strong accumulation, 0, and the yellow is not so much accumulation. So the way they calculate this is they, take an entity, let's say they have 10 Bitcoin and there's a total of 100 Bitcoin on the network. They have a 10% share. So that's one factor, their share of how much Bitcoin they own. And then they look at the change in that. So if you're an entity that adds 5 Bitcoin to your 10 Bitcoin balance, that's a pretty significant change. So you get a higher trend score accumulation by multiplying the two. And so what we saw is, and if we pair this kind of with the retail whale chart we saw before, that second top that we had kind of going into 2022, saw a lot of retail stacking, maybe some whale accumulation in here. We saw a lot less accumulation happening at the July 21 top and kind of the bottom. And now we've seen some accumulation, but kind of like pretty neutral yellow colors forming low trend accumulation scores where we're sitting right now. So kind of how I would interpret this from a demand side is that like, if I'm going to see demand pick up, I'd like to see more of these darker purple colors start to rise. Like you can see in this March 2020 bottom, a lot of accumulation was happening on the network, and the rise up to January, 2021 through July 21, a lot of accumulation was happening. And at the same time, probably like to see whales pick up and sustained in their supply. So that's just kind of an aggregate view of, my take on accumulation right now and what's happening.
Yo guys, I gotta run here. But if you guys want to keep going and keep ripping, that's great. But appreciate everyone tuning in here on YouTube on Spaces. If you find any of this stuff insightful, or just want to get more of this stuff on a daily basis with the visuals, make sure to check out the deep dive. We have a rebrand coming soon. Name change to be announced later, but it's gonna be nice. And at the very least, check out the free tier where we put out stuff to all subs at least once a week. Catch you later.
Thank you, Dylan. And guys, I cannot stress this enough. If you are not subscribed, it will be one of the best things, best emails you read on a weekly basis. These guys put in a ton of work on it. I'm holding Sam hostage for another 5 minutes because I am truly fascinated by this. And then specifically, actually, the next slide you had shared with us, the fund inflows. I know we talked a little bit about just sort of the way money has been working around Bitcoin, how we're seeing a little bit less on the supply side. Talk to us a little bit about this chart and what you're taking away from it, please.
Yeah, totally. This is not data that we collect ourselves, but is available in public and aggregated by a company called ByteTree. Essentially, they aggregate a lot of fund flow data, different market network valuation data around Bitcoin, and they publish that out. So you can go to ByteTree, spelled with a Y instead of an I in Byte. You can go to bytetree.com and see all this information. So I think this is a pretty interesting chart to just get lay of the land of like institutional demand. So what fund flows here are tracking are about 19 Bitcoin investment vehicles around the world. So they can be Bitcoin denominated, as in like a spot ETF where you have to hold Bitcoin, or they can be something like the BITO futures ETF that is essentially US dollar flows, but you can transfer that into Bitcoin terms and see. It's really just a good proxy for like what demand is happening. And I like looking at it over like a 30 to 90 day like cumulative flow. And it's over the last year through 2021, you can see a lot of that institutional money driving price in terms of where that demand is. You saw like in June kind of 2021 or summer 2021, right before that, you see this huge pickup in Bitcoin denominated flows. So when people say like, oh, the Purpose Bitcoin ETF in Canada is seeing inflows, like that's included in here. So really, I think looking at that rate of change and saying like, is this accelerating? Is price going to lag this or kind of be coordinated and connected? So what we kind of saw like at that second high looks also, since this includes BITO futures ETF, this is some derivatives and speculation here. So not all spot Bitcoin ETF driven, but you know that you can see that demand rising. And then coming down to our recent lows and then kind of rising again into this chop range where we are. So like where I would say, I look at this and say, okay, some of that demand has come back through January, which we also saw on some of that accumulation whale chart and the accumulation chart, we saw some of that increasing. And then it's kind of like stalled more neutral here. Maybe it looks like a declining impulse on the 30-day fund flows. You could look at like the 7-day and kind of get a better idea of where that's trending. So I kind of demand just sitting here. So I think this is a good, easy chart for people to look at and say, okay, where's the demand impulse? What does that look like? And then is that going to have some type of effect on price as it's kind of proven to do in the past?
Awesome, Sam. Thank you for breaking that down for us and all of the charts that you've shared. I know how much you have on your plate and I don't want to steal you for too much longer. Has there been anything that we haven't had a chance to touch on that you'd like to highlight before we wrap up today's segment?
Yeah, maybe exchange balances have been talked about a lot in Twitter, and I've got a couple of charts here. We can just run through one briefly just to kind of talk through some of the dynamics there. We want to just go to that first one that shows net flow, kind of monthly color coordinated here. But the biggest takeaway is I think, you know, a lot of on-chain analysis, you know, take with context as well. I know Coinbase looks like a lot of Bitcoin exchange outflow is left over the last week. And so far, March has been shaping up to be a pretty decent outflow month, which I would say, you know, Bitcoin exchange flows is also a good signal of larger term demand, especially on the Coinbase side, as it's usually more institutional buying that's going through that platform. So right now we're sitting at, you know, almost minus 40K off through March, Bitcoin that's flowed out of exchanges and assumed to be in more cold storage, kind of safe, secure location that's not coming back to the market. And so if we look at that within context, I think this is a good sign over the last 6 months that some of this is picking up. But in terms of like major outflow months that we saw before that led to price rallies, especially in more of a bullish macro environment, you're seeing much higher outflows per month of 50 to 70K to more than that Bitcoin. So I would say, you know, this is a positive sign to say that, yes, someone is buying Bitcoin here, taking off exchanges, some demand is picking it up. But in terms of magnitude, I personally would look or want to see this kind of go down further, more outflows happening before having more of a kind of sentiment bullish flip in the short term. But Just some dynamics that I think are interesting from the exchange side, that also easy metric for kind of people to track on their own as well.
A lot of great stuff and a lot of great information from the legend himself, Sam. If you are not already following him, I know everyone on Spaces, you can literally click the button to go ahead and follow him. For everyone on YouTube, it's at Sam J Rule. Give the man a follow. This is Dylan LeClair's right-hand man in all of it. Sam, thank you so much for all of this. And again, a reminder, if you want more information on this, if you're interested, if this has now piqued your curiosity, you need to be subscribed to the DeepDive subscription before it rebrands, and I have to start calling it something else. But in the meantime, it's still called DeepDive. Go make sure you subscribe to the free tier. These guys break down in a lot more detail than what we've been able to cover here. Sam, I'll let you get the last word before we cut to a quick commercial break.
No, cool. Thanks, Q. Thanks everyone for listening in. Like you said, you can follow me on Twitter. There's a DeepDive welcome link in my Twitter page if you want to sign up. We have a free subscription, paid subscription. We cover everything: derivatives, mining, on-chain, macro analysis, anything Bitcoin related. So check it out. Our latest piece is up on the Substack, which we cover the latest kind of Bitcoin mining developments over the last month across public miners. So yeah, thanks again.
Guys, thank you everyone who tuned in on Spaces. We're going to cut to a quick commercial break over here on YouTube before we wrap up today's episode. So feel free to come over and actually see what this crazy raspy voice actually sounds like. For everyone on YouTube, thank you so much. We're going to cut to a quick commercial and we'll be back shortly. Thank you all who have stuck around. It's been quite a day. We are entering the third hour, and no, we will not finish this hour, but for those who've been with us all day, I'm going to put this on my producer, Chris, to throw in one last Sats code into the chat, and I'll keep talking until that gets populated good and someone wins it. In the meantime, though, if you have not already, use code YTMAG, get 10% off of your Bitcoin 22 conference tickets. Both Sam and Dylan will be speaking and giving a presentation on what they're seeing on on-chain metrics. People like Willie Woo, Sam Clement, Will Clement, and Willie Woo. Jesus. They will also be in attendance. I believe Will be giving a speech as well. You know, I'm looking at the agenda right now, and I'm chomping at the bit seeing some of the speakers that we haven't even made formal announcements of, but if you actually dig into this thing, you see some exciting names that will also be in attendance and speaking. For those of you who I know you've shared, you're not going to be able to either afford the ticket or the flight or make your way down. We will be having a very, very special stream that we're putting together. So you won't want to miss that if you're going to miss the conference itself. And as always, guys, stack sats, be humble. The carrot code is up and live. I will keep talking until someone says that they want it in this chat. There are 39 of you. How has no one won this carrot code already? I give you 5 more seconds before I myself will go and enter this carrot code into my carrot app. Also, a quick reminder that code YTMAG can also be used in the Bitcoin Magazine store. You can get 21% off of any and all swag that you'd like. And there's going to be some really cool, fun swag to buy that's going to be exclusively sold at the conference as well. There'll be some plushies. There'll be some books. There's a whole bazaar. Thank you to the person who redeemed the carrot code so I can finally stop talking and rest my voice yet again. Guys, today's episode was awesome. I hope you had fun and learned a ton. We're excited about tomorrow's. I'm going to be having a very long conversation with Lawrence just about markets, and we're going to be diving into some charts as well. I could see the look on my producer Chris's face because I did not tell him that, and he is not happy about that. In the meantime, guys, Stacks hats, they're still cheap. Adios.